Chapter 1332. Damn it, don't tease me. What exactly happened? Tell me quickly. Veins popped up on Duque's forehead, and he looked like he was about to eat someone alive. Seeing how anxious her master was, Vanessa giggled heartlessly. Looks like, my dear master, even though you've left your mortal body and become a demigod, you're still that beast of a duke. Alright, I'll stop teasing you. Seeing that Duque was really going to flip out, Vanessa stopped while she was ahead. It was Lady Aurelia's suggestion. Aurelia? What about her? Duque was stunned. Nothing, because Lady Aurelia is pregnant with your child. After telling His Majesty Sylvanus, His Majesty Sindorii hinted that she wanted to focus on becoming a demigod, so he won't stop the other beauties in the alliance from pursuing you. Wait a minute. Why can't I understand this kind of dazzling operation? That was the expression of the dumbfounded Duque. A second later, Duque laughed involuntarily. He recalled that he had the reputation of being a playboy in the alliance. In recent years there had been a lot less women, and the biggest reason was because Queen Sylvanus used her aura to protect him. With a valiant temperament and sharp eyes, the three Windrunner sisters accompanied him on all kinds of occasions with an aura that made others shrink back. They were originally great beauties that were one in a million. They had received the complete training of nobility, and with the perfect figure unique to the High Elves, as well as the battlefield achievements that made mortal women tremble in fear. The three sisters were the most unique scenery in all the Alliance gatherings. In terms of beauty alone, there might be some noble ladies in the Alliance who could approach their level, but with the addition of Sylvanus' status as the queen, it was enough to make all mortal women despair. Those with beauty did not have the status. Those with the status did not have the ability. Even if there were all three, the three of them were together, and the addition of the beautiful sisters was terrifying. If they did not nod, who would dare say that they would definitely be able to get a place in Duque's harem? Naturally, the Windrunner sisters brushed off all the beauties who failed in their eyes. Duque had a strange expression on his face. Then why did Sylvanus suddenly? Vanessa sighed. It's all because I'm afraid you'll mess around. Don't you think about who you've pushed down recently? Who can stop you if your taste goes crazy? His Majesty wasn't too willing at first, but Lady Aurelia persuaded him to think of Cenarius, and His Majesty immediately agreed. Yes, the goddess and the white deer demigod, and then the goddess gave birth to the forest demigod Cenarius in the form of a centaur. Just imagining such a scene was very dirty. As a transmigrator, Duque could not help but think about it. In Greek mythology, how did Zeus, the most unscientific geneticist in history, create the Tauren? How did his brother, Poseidon, create so many sea monsters? Please listen to the story of Zeus the bulldozer. Duque choked. He really spat it out. At the end of the day, it was all his fault. At the end of the day, it was all because he played dragon taming with Onyxia on a whim. Alright, although she was in human form when she tamed the dragon, no one would forget her identity as the Black Dragon Princess. Oh my god. So I've already embarked on the path of no return for the beastly Duke? Duque suddenly found that his life had become gloomy. Caw caw caw. The crows on a tiche cawed again. For some reason in Duque's ears, it became HQ. Discovered a pervert. Now under arrest. No, my taste is very normal. Duque swore in front of Miss Vanessa, the representative of the grand jury. Really? Duque did not notice the craftiness in Vanessa's eyes. Really? Duque raised 3 fingers and swore, as long as it's a good-looking beauty, I like it. Really? Then, shall we play a little game? What game? Take a guess, how many fan of knives, throwing knives do I have hidden down there? Vanessa threw out the question, and then, with an elegant ladle-like bow, she lifted the hem of her skirt with both hands. As a transmigrator who was deeply poisoned by Japanese culture, Duque deeply hated the traditional black, thick and monotonous maid uniform in Azeroth's aristocratic mansions. As early as 10 years ago, Duque had already developed the standard maid uniform in the anime style. The maid uniform was black with white flowers. There was a black and white butterfly tie, and below it was a low-cut, deep V neckline. However, the parts that were supposed to be exposed were covered by a hazy white muslin. The lower abdomen was a 3-row white muslin binding design at the top, middle and bottom. The back was a breathable lace carving design, and the back was a large white bow at the back. The skirt was made of soft satin, matched with white lace at the hem. To reduce temptation, it was a mid-skirt design that went past the knees. However, the hem of the skirt seemed to be rising higher and higher. As expected, the long tube of translucent black stockings was evil. Now, Duque's eyes could not move away at all. The long skirt swayed rhythmically, one left, one right, inch by inch, as if it was some kind of evil rhythm, tugging at Duke's heartstrings inch by inch, as if it had become some kind of evil rhythm. Gulp. This was the sound of someone swallowing saliva. Finally, it reached the end of the long tube of black stockings. He saw it. He was almost there. That was the black silk suspender to prevent the stockings from slipping off. He saw it. Of course, there were no flying knives. Yo, my dear master, you still haven't guessed it? Vanessa's eyes were like silk, and she leaned slightly closer to Duque. But with this leaning, Duque immediately realized that the maid in front of him was no longer the maid that her father had thrown over to be a maid, the one that could not do anything well. Instead, she was a mature and charming woman that he had bestowed eternal life and youth. Even though she said that, her hands didn't stop lifting her skirt. Hey, my master, do you really not have any speech to express? Speech? Yes, of course there was. Not to mention speech, I can even make a freestyle for you. The problem is that thing is too simple. It would be embarrassing for me, a demigod, to say it. With a thought, Duque opened his mouth and said, Guan Guan Ju Jiu in the state of the river. A fair and graceful lady, a gentleman's desire. This passage of classical Chinese from Transmigration was enough to make Vanessa choke to death. She was dumbfounded. Looking at her face full of question marks, Duque felt smug in his heart. Your master eye has finally turned the tables. Do you really want to know? Do you really want to know? I won't tell you. You want me to say something human? Sure. There were only 6 words, black. Place. *ck. Of course, Vanessa knew that Duque was counterattacking. After a short moment of panic, she was not angry. Instead, she directly revealed the mystery, clang clang. Pft. Duque spat out a mouthful of old blood and gritted his teeth. You tricked me. Why? Safety pants and whatnot. It was all King Evil. Chapter 1333. The leader was angry. Oh no, Duque was angry. The anger of a demigod was very scary. Duque roared on the spot and was about to grab Vanessa. He didn't care about the consequences, he would beat her on the ass first. Ah. What evil, you're clearly a beast, Duke. You're thinking the wrong way. Facing Duque's pounce, Vanessa nimbly lowered her body and easily dodged him like a slippery eel. For stealth and sprint, she ran out like a wisp of smoke. Unless Duque was serious, he wouldn't be able to catch a hero-level thief who only wanted to run. Just you wait. Don't let me catch you. At the gate, Duque made a declaration like a big villain. In the next second, Duque's face and posture froze as if he had been petrified. He suddenly realized that beside the gate, his other maid, Solarian, was standing there with a smile on her face. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Master, you don't have to apologize to a little maid. Solarian nodded lightly with a smile. Duque looked Solarian up and down. Seeing that the master astromancer was normal, he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. What, master? Do you want me to be like other girls and cut my skirt a few inches shorter, or open my collar a few inches, and then secretly wear the so-called winning underwear? Solarian's smile widened. Please, please don't. Duque's face fell. I'm so happy. It seems that after becoming a mage and demigod master, you're still the gentleman you used to be. Solarian seemed a little excited. Duque was a little embarrassed. He didn't know if he should tell her that before he transmigrated, the word gentleman was synonymous with pervert. Duque facepalmed. I'm also very happy. At least there's a normal woman by my side. Not really. My family also sent word that I can successfully conceive your child, master, Solarian said calmly. Duque burst out laughing. Is it that surprising? In Cule Salis, commoners without magic talent always hoped to give their daughters to noble mages. As long as they could give birth to a boy or a girl with magic talent, they would be lucky. In the eyes of the high elves, only by mastering magic could one change one's fate. Even great nobles with noble bloodlines would hope to marry into other great mage families so that their descendants would have a greater chance of becoming Silver Moon counselors. Please note that even after Her Majesty Sylvanas Windrunner ascended to the throne, this practice is still deeply rooted among the Blood Elves. After listening to Solarian's explanation, Duque more or less understood why the elven girls were suddenly so enthusiastic. The High Elves were originally magic maniacs. After splitting from the Night Elves, they had been worshipping the spellcasters for 8,000 years. Even though the Sindorii kingdom was now ruled by rangers, how could the customs of 8,000 years be changed so easily? But Duque couldn't figure out what Queen Sylvanas was thinking. What about you? What do you think? Duke asked as if he was possessed by some supernatural being. I don't know. Maybe when the time comes I won't refuse. Not refusing might not necessarily be willing. Is it because of Kale that's? Sigh, I haven't paid attention to him for a long time. Please don't misunderstand, Master. From the moment I swore allegiance to you, I no longer have anything to do with Kale, that's. He is more like a beautiful vision of my childhood, a dream that is destined to never come true. I have accepted my fate and I am doing well now. After a pause, Solarian continued, of course if you want me to kill Kale, that's I will do it. After all, when that day comes, Kale, that's will probably have committed an unforgivable crime for the Alliance. But I think when I do it I will probably hesitate. Duque was a little surprised but also a little relieved. This was human nature. This was the Solarian of flesh and blood, and not the Solarian that Duke had in mind. The Solarian that should only appear in the Storm Fortress with no backstory at all. She was like a boss that was made out of paper. Phew. Thank you for your honesty. Duque smiled, waved his hand and then ran to find Queen Sylvanas. Looking at Duque's back, Solarian seemed to be lost in thought. On the other hand, perhaps it was the so-called no comparison, no harm. When Thrall, who was fighting in the ruins of Ankh-Karaj, heard the news from the Alliance through the undead thief messenger, the expression on his face was very interesting. What? They didn't lose much and they have already taken care of the other leaders of the Ankh-Karaj temple. They are resting while waiting for us to finish here and then besiege Si Thun? At this time Orgrim walked in front of Thrall, and his voice rumbled. There is no need to worry, Thrall. As a great chief, figure out what you can do and what you can do well. If you can understand this, you are an outstanding chief. Thrall sighed. Just being outstanding is not enough. In peacetime, an outstanding leader was generally enough to close the gap with a rival country. Unfortunately, this was wartime and any small gap could be infinitely magnified. The tribe originally had fewer strong people than the Alliance, and it was not easy for them to accept the Forgotten Ones and slightly close the gap with the Alliance. Suddenly, there was news that the commander of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, had become a demigod. In comparison, the tribe had suffered heavy losses in the ruins of Ankh-Karaj, which was even weaker. Although the Forsaken were dead, the dead could not die a second time. If he was killed again, then his body and soul would be destroyed in the truest sense. Even Anastrian, as the leader of the Forgotten Ones, could not find a good way. Even if they lost a second-rate chief who had become an undead warrior and a former Silver Moon counselor who had become a lich, it was still a great loss. In fact, the Sun King's face was gloomy. After being ruthlessly expelled from the Eastern Kingdom by the Alliance, the Forgotten Ones had lost a stable source of troops. Originally, they hoped that after joining the tribe, Thrall would allow the Forgotten Ones to resurrect new Forgotten Ones from the dead tribe warriors. Who knew that Thrall would begin to believe in the way of nature and firmly rejected him. Not only that, even Orgrim, who was theoretically his subordinate, was on Thrall's side. Anastrian's gaze became even colder. Fortunately, he was a dead man. No matter when his body was filled with shadow energy and did not further decay, it was still full of a dark aura. No one noticed the change in his gaze. At this time, Orgrim patted Thrall's shoulder. Don't think too much. The tribe should do its own thing first. We must first not make mistakes, then wait for the real opportunity to come. Chapter 1334. After the Alliance Hero Squad had rested for a full 5 days, the Horde Hero Squad finally succeeded in killing Ajrian the Scarless at the cost of 3 second-rate chiefs who had turned into undead warriors and 2 high-grade druids. Sal was not satisfied with the result because the losses were too great. But he couldn't complain. Compared to the Alliance, the Horde obviously lacked healing methods. The druids from Thunder Cliff and the shamans trained by Orgrimmar were second-rate. Obviously, in terms of healing, the Alliance's priests and paladins were better. Moreover, the undead couldn't use natural healing spells, so they had to rely on the third-rate undead priests' dark healing magic. Whether they admitted it or not, the Alliance's heroes were far better than the Horde in terms of endurance. Cain refused to go into the arms of the Forgotten after the death of the Tauren druid, and because of this, he had a bad relationship with Anastrian. Sal was now twice as big as his head. Fortunately, the spoils of war dropped by Ajrian slightly diluted this faint sadness. This hammer is good, I want it. Orgrimmar had his eyes on the frosted warhammer that Ajrian dropped. Compared to the semi-artifact Hammer of Destruction that he used before, this thing was a transitional item, except for the fact that the hammerhead was square and looked like the Hammer of Destruction. Sal's mouth twitched as if he wanted to say something. Orgrimmar patted Sal on the shoulder and said, A dead man should look like a dead man. I'm already very happy to be able to jump out of the graveyard and continue to fight for the Horde. If I wanted the hammer of destruction back, I should have taken that thing to the grave instead of passing it on to you. Thank you, Sal said heavily. His cold hand patted Sal on the shoulder and Orgrimmar smiled and said, "You have done very well. The young great chief. This was an undeniable victory. We should be laughing. Shouldn't we?" Yes. Sal was halfway through his words when his face suddenly changed. Not only him but the entire Horde hero group was in shock. The earth was trembling. Something huge was breaking out of the ground. In Naxxramas, various alarms were blaring. Even though the floating fortress wouldn't be affected by the tremors of the ground, the elemental waves that were as strong as tsunamis still surged over, causing the entire fortress to sway like a lone boat in the middle of a stormy sea. Duque's voice echoed throughout the fortress. "Open the protective shield. Lower the altitude. Move the fortress to the north. Close all the cannons and protective doors. Grab onto something that can stabilize your body and resist the impact." Naxxramas, who was thousands of meters in the air, was already in such a sorry state, let alone the frontline soldiers. Even if Duque had expected Sea Thun to erupt and withdrew the coalition forces at the Beetle Wall, the Beetle Gate could not be left undefended, so he still arranged a 1,000-man brigade there. However, a few kilometers to the north of the Beetle platform, there was a 30,000-strong mechanized army. The soldiers were all sitting on the steam-tracked armored vehicles during shifts, and they could attack or retreat as they pleased. From the looks of it, the 1,000-man team was doomed. The earth was roaring, and tens of thousands of tons of boulders arched up under the evil power, breaking through the sea of sand and floating to the ground. One by one, the sand dunes rose high and then exploded like bombs, sending rocks flying in all directions. The coalition soldiers only saw a blur, and countless disgusting tentacles, like sharp knives piercing through a piece of paper, grew out of the sea of sand. These tentacles, with terrifying giant white hooks on their tips, or a large, disgusting eyeball, spun and pounced on every coalition soldier. The soldiers who had no time to react were easily pierced through, or their whole bodies were torn into several pieces like a piece of paper. Those disgusting tentacles with a large number of barbs on the surface were already frightening enough. There were also a large number of eyeball tentacles, using their purple-white eyeballs to emit terrifying blue rays. The damage wasn't fatal, but this ray, which was similar to mental whip, brought great pain to every soldier who was hit. "Oh, no? What is this? Fight back. Fight back." To be honest, artillery at close range was a tragedy. But the coalition soldiers had no choice, and their swords could hardly cause any damage to these tentacles. On the contrary, as long as they hesitated, it was likely that they would be carried into the depths of the earth together with the tank. The huge pit, like a whirlpool, swallowed countless coalition soldiers. Was there a huge mouth with countless teeth under the quicksand? Or was it a wriggling mouth? In grief and panic, the soldiers had no time to think. But everyone knew that this should be the ancient god Sea Thun that the higher-ups of the Alliance had repeatedly emphasized. Every soldier guarding the Beetle Gate had been informed of the risks here in advance, and they had even left a suicide note at the request of the commander. They couldn't accept it. They were the best soldiers of the Alliance and the Horde. They took turns to guard, maintaining the highest vigilance, but still couldn't do anything and were one-sidedly slaughtered. It wasn't that Duque didn't prepare a way out for them. More than 20 portals were open there 24 hours a day. Regardless of day or night, there were 3 platoons of Griffin Knights, Hippogriffs, or Wyverns in the sky to receive them at any time. But everything happened too quickly, and almost in an instant all the portals were destroyed and all the aerial knights were shot down by the tentacles. At this point, since there was no way out, many people mustered up all their courage, roared, and rushed towards the wriggling tentacles with mortar shells or explosives. Boom, boom, boom. Explosions rang out continuously. When Duque reacted and opened a new portal to receive them, only 68 out of a full team of 1,000 returned, and most of them were left with lifelong disabilities. Duque was silent and his face was ashen. He knew how terrifying Sea Thun was, but Jaina gently pulled Duque's hand. "Don't blame yourself, you've already done very well." Varrock Salyafar stood at the side with an agitated expression. His long fangs were clenched and his green face seemed to have turned a dark green. Magni was the most agitated. Because they wanted to retreat at any time, this team of 1,000 was the most mechanized, which also meant that the ratio of dwarves was the highest. He walked over and his heavy armor made his steps seem even heavier. "Duque, I'm only asking you, we waited for 5 days. Was it worth it?" Magni wasn't questioning Duque's decision. Actually, he was the same as many of the Alliance's powerhouses. He didn't understand why Duque had waited for 5 days. If waiting for the Horde's powerhouses was a bonus of 1, but Si Thun's strength was a bonus of 10, then he might as well go and fight Si Thun right from the start after killing the twin emperors. Duque couldn't tell Magni the answer, but his eyes shone with determination. He only answered Magni with one word: worth it. Chapter 1335. Magni smiled. It was a bitter smile. That's good. Then my old brother can rest in peace. No wonder Magni was so excited. The more dangerous the mission, the more elite the troops. Dwarves might seem to be good at fighting, but they were actually built up over time. Dwarves had very long lives. Although they couldn't compare to elves, they could live for a few hundred years. Those who were lost this time were all old brothers who had been with Magni for many years. It had been 20 years since the second battle of the Dark Portal. Not to mention personal relationships. Even if it was just a simple superior-subordinate relationship, the death of so many highly mechanized elite veterans would still be heartbroken. They had to defend against the Beetle Gate. If they just used bugs to rush out like before, Silithus would be covered in bugs and that would be hard to clean up. This was the dilemma of the commander. Duque sighed. Bulang, after confirming that Naxxramas is safe, cover it with artillery. Even if we can't kill Si Thun, don't let its tentacles grow endlessly. Understood. The third brother of the Bronzebeard family nodded. Very soon the entire fortress was filled with the sound of artillery. Naxxramas, the Heavenbreaker, and many other flying battleships used violent artillery shells to cover the entire north side of the Ankh-Karaj temple. Did you notice? Magni asked 2 minutes later. Looking at the temple roof that had exploded in the artillery fire and the huge pillars that had collapsed, Duque replied, yes, the divine power shield has disappeared. The enemy's defense had weakened, which wasn't necessarily a good thing. The biggest possibility was that Si Thun had always had excess divine power to protect the entire territory. If it was compared to loosening 5 fingers in an attempt to grab the enemy's fist, now it was like pulling back all 5 fingers and clenching them into a fist, ready to fight against the allied forces. At this time, an orc messenger ran into the command center. The Great Chief and the others are back. Almost as soon as he finished speaking, the door of the command center opened again. Under the salute of 12 Alliance and Horde guards, the burly Horde men returned. Duque, how is the situation? The tribe can attack at any time. Sal's face was filled with exhaustion, but his eyes were still shining. Grom and Kane, who had worked with Duque before, felt the same way. Even though Grom only had one arm left, he still had the strength to wield Bloodhowl. Duque smiled. Warriors of the tribe, you need to rest. Grom stepped forward. Just as he was about to speak, Duque gestured for him to keep quiet. I don't mean to underestimate the tribe's powerhouses, but Si Thun's momentum is at its peak. Is it appropriate for us to clash head-on with them? Was it appropriate? Of course not. Even if they joined forces, the allied forces would still be the weaker side. After all, Si Thun was still a true god. Duque ignored the reactions of the experts in the tribe and turned around. Tyrant, I'll have to trouble you for the next 2 days. You don't have to use your full strength. Just use the small starfall to get rid of all the tentacles that it's growing out. Understood. Tyrant combed her hair and nodded. To control such a huge meteorite with such a ridiculous mass and kinetic energy, Tyrant obviously needed to expend a lot of energy. But ordinary starfall could be fired every 10 minutes as long as she had Elun's divine power to replenish it, let alone once every 8 hours. Duque looked at Sal again. I have confidence in doing this. Please forgive me for not being able to tell you right now. Right now, the warriors of the tribe need to rest. 1 day is not enough. At least 3 days. Sal did not waste any time and directly agreed. Okay. On the 4th day we will gather to kill the god. Sal stretched out his green hand that was even bigger than a bear's paw. Duque smiled and shook hands with Sal. This was a historic handshake. At this moment, no one realized what this handshake meant. It had to be said that Duque was very kind. The warriors of the tribe had just finished fighting in the ruins of Ankh-Karaj. If they directly followed the alliance to fight Si Thun, it would be a great victory. No one could estimate the losses that would follow. After all, at this moment, most of the warriors of the tribe were injured. The wounds could be repaired with nature magic or holy light. What about the lost physical strength, spirit, and blood? Anyone who overdrew their energy from strenuous exercise would be tired that night and would not have any energy the next day. Duque gave them a full 3 days of rest, which was very rare for the warriors of the tribe. In order to ensure the quality of their rest, they were even placed in an independent space in the center of Naxxramas, enjoying a quiet holiday without listening to the sound of gunfire all day long. 4 days later, on April 1st, year 22 of the Dark Portal, a day that was a bit funny for the travelers, the Allied forces attacked. 3 consecutive days of carpet bombing turned the entire Ankh-Karaj temple into ruins. Si Thun tried to fight back, but Bu Lang made full use of the range of the cannons and kept teasing Si Thun at least 5,000 meters away from the edge of the Ankh-Karaj temple. Now, there were basically no tentacles on the surface of the temple ruins. Let's go. Under Duque's order, the Alliance, the tribe, and a certain black dragon princess in human form, a total of 40 people set off from Naxxramas on a pure-blooded firehawk. They set off in the early morning and rushed straight into the huge hole created by the collapse of the entrance of the Ankh-Karaj temple. Almost as soon as they entered the hole, Duque and the others received a grand welcome. Countless tentacles broke through the rock stratum and appeared around the dark cave walls. They writhed madly with their claws and fangs bared. Looking from afar, the blurry writhing in the darkness was accompanied by a terrifying sound, which made many heroines feel numb. Damn it! Why does it seem like we've lost our minds and sent ourselves into Si Thun's mouth as snacks? Gavin Rad complained fiercely. Actually, it's pretty much the same, Duque replied casually. If you knew later that many people had the chance to be swallowed into Si Thun's stomach and fight for their lives, would you be furious? Duque didn't tell them all about this strategy because apart from the ancient titans, no one really had the experience of fighting Si Thun. In particular, he didn't want to use the theory of fate that he had used to scare people into recruiting underlings on the tribe. As the pure-blooded firehawk descended, suddenly, a rock wall in the 12 o'clock direction of the main force exploded. Jaina raised her hand and several elemental light bullets shot in that direction. The exploding fire elements lit up the area as if it were daytime. A monster in the shape of a big earthworm with a huge mouth jumped out. Aro? Gavin Rad was shocked. No, it's even smaller. Queen Sylvanas had sharp eyes and immediately determined that the size was wrong. Bah! We've even killed its old man. Why would we be afraid of a small one? Chapter 1336. That being said, everyone was descending quickly on the pure-blooded firehawks. How to deal with this big guy was definitely a problem. It would definitely be a joke if the main force went over. Apart from Kudrin Wildhammer, no one in the Allied army was good at aerial combat. The pure-blooded firehawk's flames were really not enough against this huge monster that was at least 100 or 200 meters long. The huge earthworm bared its fangs and pounced over, bringing with it a large amount of rubble as it came crashing down with the momentum of a collapsing mountain. Under the illumination of the flares, everyone could clearly see that the squirming mouth was like a dense concentric circle from the outside to the inside. Each circle was made up of countless sharp teeth. It was not hard to imagine that if anyone was swallowed, they would definitely be torn into countless pieces in an instant. A few of the heroines shuddered. Just when everyone thought that Duque would send out Onyxia, Duque casually waved his hand. 5 seemingly small fireballs appeared out of thin air and shot straight at the monster's lower jaw. The 5 fireballs were aimed at the back half of the circular mouth. The 5 dots were very clear. If it was his first time meeting this guy, Duque might be flustered. However, after killing Oro in the Battle of Mount Hyjal, Duque had already figured out the physiological structure of the entire Oro family. Strictly speaking, Oro was very similar to an earthworm, a low-level annelid. This type of annelid usually had multiple hearts. This kind of immature little Oro had a thick blood vessel on its back and abdomen. In the middle were 5 pairs of swollen blood vessels that were connected, and these blood vessels could beat rhythmically. By beating, blood could circulate throughout the body. For safety, it was also covered with a thick annelid shell. However, with the system's scan, Duque had already calculated the rough defense of this hard shell. The 5 fireballs made a big turn in the air, drawing out a clear hook-shaped trajectory, and finally shot into the opening of the shell without hesitation. The 5 small fireballs entered little Oro's body. It did not seem to have any effect, but everyone noticed that the huge earthworm monster's body stiffened. Its body still maintained its pouncing posture, but that was due to the momentum from before. In less than 2 seconds, 5 heavy, muffled sounds came from all 5 places at the same time. 5 huge spurts of pus and blood splattered down, almost drenching the faces of everyone in the hero group. Wind. Gavin Rad and Sylvanas moved at the same time, using a gust of wind to blow away the pus and blood that was gushing over. The strong corrosive pus and blood splashed on the rock wall in the opposite direction in the strong wind, and even corroded many of Si Thun's small tentacles. Let's go. Duque took the lead and rushed into a cave in the southwest corner. I'm not going the wrong way, am I? Why don't I lead the way? I think we should trust our instincts. Magni bragged. Hee hee. Duke looked at the dwarf king with a pair of loving eyes. Jaina giggled. Do you think Duque did nothing these days? His magic net has already covered half of the Ankh-Karaj shrine. Sun King Anastrian, who was walking at the back of the team, was shocked. Of course he knew what the magic net was, and he couldn't help but wonder, Si Thun just let Duque's power seep into his territory like that? Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the dark cave, flames lit up in an orderly fashion. They were clusters of fire elements floating in the air. They weren't attached to the walls, and they had nothing to do with the original structure of the cave. In the next moment, everyone suddenly realized that they could see through things. They realized that they could see beyond the cave walls. It wasn't true X-ray vision. Instead, there was a strong elemental light shining behind the walls of the cave. The light even passed through the walls, and the heroes could see it with their naked eyes. This is an elemental passage? Sun King was shocked. He had imagined countless times how big the gap between him and Dooku was. Now he saw it. The gap was so big that it made him despair. Duque's indescribably surging magic had already invaded every corner of this space. There was a clear elemental passageway at almost every fist-sized distance in the entire passageway. There was no need to specially connect to the elemental plane. With just a thought, he could draw out all kinds of elements from the surrounding passages for his own use. As long as he signed a contract to enter the magic net, Anastrian shuddered. The amount of magic, the purity of the elements, and the creative and revolutionary way of using them. Compared to this, every magic theory he had learned for thousands of years was simply a long and smelly foot-binding cloth. He deserved to be thrown into the trash heap of history. This wasn't just an increase in magic. At the same time, the network formed by these elemental passages was also a huge alarm system. There was no need for Duque to remind them. Everyone had already seen a tentacle as thick as a bucket breaking through the rock formation on the right side of the passage, trying to sneak in and attack. It drilled, and just as it was about to drill through the wall, it actually stopped there, waiting for its prey to take the bait. If not for the magic net's alarm, this would be the time to test their reaction. Unfortunately, Gavin Rad snickered shamelessly. Then he carried the wind sword and pretended not to see, walking towards the tentacle. In front of him was Magni, who was also pretending not to know. Behind him was Queen Sylvanas, who already had an arrow on her bow. Bam! The huge tentacle suddenly attacked. It burst out of the wall, and immediately opened its purple eyes, preparing to give Gavin Rad a mental lash. Unfortunately, if this sneak attack succeeded, then the Alliance of Heroes would not live up to its name. Before the eyeball tentacle's eyelids could fully open, the wind sword with the light of lightning slashed down. On the flank, the enlarged Inferno hammer was like an erupting volcano, about to erupt at the next moment. Queen Sylvanas' arrow was the fastest, and it arrived first even though it had been fired later. The eyeball tentacle's eyelids were only half opened when it was shot, and it twitched. The twitching was extremely short, but that was enough. The Inferno hammer and wind sword fell at the same time, directly destroying the entire tentacle. Not only that, with the power of the magic net, the fire and lightning elements instantly backfired, spreading towards the depths of the ground in the direction that the tentacle had extended from. Hiss. An indescribable groan seemed to come from the depths of the ground. Facing the huge hole that the tentacle had made, Gavin Rad made an arrogant gesture of cutting his throat. Si Thun. Your Lord Gavin Rad is here. Wash yourself and prepare to be made into squid tentacles. Duque spurted out. Gavin Rad was really a fox using the tiger's might to intimidate others. Speaking of which, making squid tentacles from something that would affect the appearance of the city? Would anyone eat it? Chapter 1337. As Duque and his team of heroes stormed through the underground tunnels of the Temple of Ankh-Karaj, the floating fortress, Naxxramas, was still on a level 1 combat alert. Plop plop plop. In the stronghold's enemy-seeking department, the sentries immediately heard this strange sound. The long-eared elf girl was slightly stunned. This was definitely not the sound of the ocean. The nearest lake or ocean was thousands of miles away. She subconsciously adjusted the magic mirror to find the source of the sound. Soon she saw an unexpected scene. It was as if the scene was happening in front of her. A strange black ripple spread out in the morning light, which was incompatible with the golden light of the rising sun. 3,000 yards to the northeast, Enemy attack. The elf girl's sharp shout seemed to have awakened the entire fortress. Bulang Bronzebeard, who was in charge of the fortress, was the first to react. He immediately shouted into the microphone used for magic transmission, "Bao Yin, retreat immediately." Bao Yin, the newest flying battleship of the Alliance. Thanks to the assembly line-like production model, the flying battleships of the Iron Furnace Castle were now produced at an average rate of one every 3 months. The dwarves and gnome craftsmen of the Iron Furnace Castle worked day and night in 3 shifts. The 3 docks were built on top of the mountains. They were built with steel directly smelted from the Iron Stove Castle's smelting furnace and the toughest 100-year-old trees in Loch Moden as the deck. The deck was covered with steel sheets and equipped with standard cannons. Each dock could produce a battleship in 9 months. Unlike the meticulously built Heavenbreaker and Black Pearl battleships, the Alliance also needed a large number of medium and light battleships as protection ships according to the needs of the war. The cruiser, whose full name was the Cleveland class or the Kappa class for short, was a product of this requirement, which focused on enhancing anti-air firepower. No one knew why the founder of the Alliance's mechanized air force, Duque, insisted on using this name, and even looked like he would roll on the ground if he didn't agree. In any case, who could argue with Duque on this kind of thing? On average, the 6 medium-sized shipyards had 2 Cadet-class cruisers flying out of the shipyards every month. No one would have thought that after Duque and his elites broke into the Ankh-Karaj shrine, the first ship to be tested would be this new cruiser. It was as if a giant water droplet had dripped into a lake that was as calm as a mirror. Starting from a single point, it expanded in all directions and rapidly spread to the side of Bao Yin. This cruiser had 2 huge propellers as its power source, so of course it wasn't propelled by backward steam. Steam did not have enough power to carry this light cruiser, that weighed over 10,000 tons. Using the power core of the latest sharp elemental furnace, it could generate 100,000 horsepower. But for a 10,000-ton ship, 100,000 horsepower was still not enough to generate enough instantaneous kinetic energy to get it out of this misfortune. In the main control room of the stronghold, Bulang's face was ashen as he watched this almost static scene. The moment he saw this huge spatial fluctuation, he smelled the kind of power that had once appeared on Si Thun's body, but it was more majestic and more difficult to match. It was a terrifying power that stood above the mortal world and coexisted with the planets, the power of God. The captain of Bao Yin, Favaro Violent Fist, was the most senior steam tank commander. Almost at the same time that the stronghold sounded the alarm, he opened a magic shield. However, when a huge tentacle that was 100 meters long appeared from the spatial ripples and swept towards Bao Yin, all evasion and resistance were rendered useless. Wherever the tentacle went, the elemental lines of law disintegrated one after another. Bulang could only watch helplessly as his old subordinate's ship was easily crushed into pieces like a dog whose neck and bones had been twisted by a python. Time seemed to slow down and every piece of debris was spinning in the air. The barrel of a gun polished to a shine. Half of the deck that still seemed to smell the fresh paint. A short and fat human figure that was wailing and still waving its hands and feet, but was quickly falling. When everything came into view, Bulang found that his heart was deeply pierced. The northeast corner of Naxxramas suddenly lit up. It was the light of wind and thunder. Aurelia and Sasha, who had been left behind for some reason, drew their bows and knocked arrows on a platform. The atmosphere was surging, and large masses of dark clouds instantly gathered in the sky above them. Half a second later, lightning flashed and thunder roared, and the sound of thunder rumbled through the entire northeast corner of the stronghold. Soon the charge was completed. With the support of the wind and thunder, 2 bolts of lightning formed a spiral in the air and fiercely crossed the void of 3,000 meters. They hit the huge tentacle that was wreaking havoc. However, it was useless. Admittedly, the joint attack of the Windrunner sisters had caused terrible damage to the tentacle. The hole that was big enough for a carriage to pass through looked really shocking. But in less than 5 seconds, after a violent squirming, everyone in the stronghold and the surrounding flying warships who were watching this scene found that the terrible tentacle had actually begun to heal on its own. Varrock muttered, his arm holding the axe trembling a little. As expected of an ancient god. At this moment time seemed to stop around them. Be it the hourglasses used to calculate time or the ancient mechanical clocks, they all stopped working. This is. The Windrunner sisters' eyes widened. With the best eyesight, they saw that the floating sand in the sky had begun to gather in a strange way. A power that they had truly seen before, evoking a distant memory in their hearts. That was in Lordaeron, when King Tyrrhenas was still alive. A giant dragon claw made of sand and stone appeared out of thin air and grabbed the lively tentacle. Everyone who witnessed this scene was filled with shock. The power of a true god could only be easily suppressed by the existence of the realm of gods. Almost without giving the onlookers time to think, there was a loud bang, and the giant tentacle quickly withered, turning into large pieces of broken rocks, falling from thousands of meters in the sky. The huge rocks fell on the soft surface of the desert. The impact of the hundreds of tons of debris and the acceleration of gravity directly made a loud roar like a cannon. There was no cannon fire, but it sounded like Nakshramas had set off a storm of cannons again. In midair, the giant dragon claw continued to tearing large sections of tentacles out of the void. This time it seemed that there was no time to petrify. The broken tentacle made a sound like tearing cloth, and then black blood gushed out. Then there was an inhuman scream, echoing over the entire Silithus. Chapter 1338. Naturally, Duque was aware of the earth-shattering battle outside. Taking advantage of the time when Si Thun was withdrawing his forces, Duque attacked while the enemy retreated. His magic net, which had almost nibbled away at the deepest part of the enemy's nest, could ensure that magic messages were unobstructed to the greatest extent. The hero group was still advancing. Although they lined up in a more reasonable oval-shaped formation, the tentacles were everywhere. After discovering that they could be sensed, Si Thun's tentacles chose to attack at a faster and fiercer speed. They used speed to attack. With so many tentacles attacking at the same time, everyone's skills could be seen at a glance. Almost everyone had been attacked. As they advanced in the underground cave while fighting, Sal felt that there was a problem. It was just like how the Horde lacked warriors and had to recruit the Forgotten Ones to supplement Orgrim and the other undead warrior heroes. Because of the disappearance of Ronan and Turalian, the Alliance had to supplement a group of second-line powerhouses. But second-line my ass. Where did these guys come from? A red-haired female elf with an impressive bust, who almost burst Sindoriai's red military uniform, walked proudly next to Queen Sylvanas. This female elf who called herself Legolas claimed to be a warrior and was also holding Eskel's claw, which was classified as a glove. This thing came from the Molten Core Magmadar's spoils of war. It was a set with both the left and right claws. At first she didn't say a word, but her aura was already very frightening. That was the aura of someone who had been in a high position for a long time. Without sufficient strength and confidence, it was impossible to have such an aura. She walked next to Sylvanas. It was hard to tell whether she was the queen or Sylvanas was the queen. At first, Sal only thought that this guy's aura was a bit fierce. What happened next scared him so much that his eyeballs almost popped out. A huge Si Thun tentacle broke through the rock wall and stabbed directly at her and Queen Sylvanas. Normally, Queen Sylvanas' arrow would arrive first, but who knew that Legolas' movement was even faster? The claw of that mediocre Eskel swung over, and the bystanders only felt a sudden gust of wind. In the blink of an eye, all he saw was a bloody, limp tentacle. In less than half a second, the tentacle bounced up high and fell heavily again, emitting a burning smell and the sound of a leaking ball lying on the ground softly. A tentacle that could smash a steam tank or even a destroyer into smithereens lay motionless on the ground like a rotten sausage. What was even more ridiculous was that this woman actually broke a molten core level glove. The originally sharp claws were missing a large piece, revealing the white and tender fingers. What the hell was this? The woman's finger was fine, but the molten core level glove had exploded. Could it be that the gloves couldn't keep up with her strength? Sal was going crazy. The same thing happened to the other three. An eyeball tentacle burst out, attempting to attack a mage called Dog*To Goss. In the end, this guy didn't use the magic net, nor did he connect to the elemental plane. He didn't even use an incantation. A white sea urchin that seemed to be made of pure ice flashed by, and in the next moment, that terrifying tentacle suddenly burst like a water pipe. Countless amounts of blood gushed out from the cracks of various sizes, converging into a stream of blood beside it. This tentacle that had caused damage to many heroes since the start of the war had reached the end of its life in an instant. There was also a high elf named Dom, a warrior with a long black braid. He didn't even have any equipment, and he directly hammered a sharp, curved tentacle with his fist like a drum. That tentacle seemed to have been ruthlessly smashed by a heavy industrial mechanical arm that could lift a 1,000-ton ship, and immediately went limp. Since when did the elves produce so many strong people? Thrall looked at Orgrim first. This former chief, who was already a death knight, shrugged his shoulders. His expression was clearly saying, if these fellows had been around during World War II at the Dark Portal, why would I fight Kuel Salus? Originally, Sal thought that the person next to him understood the situation the best. Who would have thought that Sun King was trying hard to keep a straight face while looking at Goss with frightened eyes? Damn. To be able to scare the Breaking Dawn level Sun King like this, there was no need to ask, this person must have a terrifying background. At this time, Wajin gently poked Sal's waist with his elbow. Following Wajin's gaze, Sal saw a strange aura on the Alliance's side. Because Malfurion Stormrage had fallen into a deep sleep, Fandral Staghelm was the boss of the Cenarian Circle again. Logically speaking, there should be no Night Elf Druid that he didn't know. But there was one in front of him. The female Druid who claimed to be Sala had a typical Night Elf green waterfall hair. Except for her pair of eyes that never opened, no matter how you looked at it, she was a typical Night Elf. Her heal, rejuvenate, and wild growth were so smooth that even Fandral, who claimed to be the #1 Druid, could not compare. It had been so long since she showed off her skills, and Fandral had been pestering her for so long. Where are you from? A solitary practitioner? Are you interested in joining the Cenarian Circle? The way of Druids needs a master like you. His interest in Sala was not fake. He expressed deep disgust for Tyron's excessive approach to the Alliance. Although Malfurion had fallen into a deep sleep and was no longer in power, he could not murder Malfurion. Within the Night Elves, he continued to rope in stronger masters to increase his faction's influence. Who knew that Sala would ignore him, and when she was asked anxiously, she asked him to go ask Duque. Fandral was depressed to death. Unfortunately, he was in a state of battle, and he did not dare to bother her too much. Otherwise, Duque would slap him and say that he was absent-minded. That bitch Tyron would not protect him. At the same time, on the void battlefield, Krasus was sitting on pins and needles because he was sitting on the throne of the one he respected the most. Not far away from him was an illusion of a gigantic blue dragon coiled in the air. At a glance, there was indeed an incomparably huge blue dragon entrenched there. If anyone could see through the thick elemental turbulence that enveloped the blue dragon, they would clearly see that there was no such huge blue dragon in that position. There was only a frost elemental dragon with a bitter smile on its face. Krasus was displeased. Saffron, if you expose me, I will not forgive you. Saffron rolled its eyes. You're blaming me? Beside Krasus, a figure in a cloak smiled bitterly. It's fine. This plan should be perfect. Even if something happens, we will prioritize protecting the void battlefield. That's for the best. Chapter 1339. Even further away from Azeroth, an interstellar battleship was quietly lurking in the asteroid zone. This was the extreme position to monitor planet Azeroth. What's up with the 4 lizards? Same old. The red and blue auras are still exaggerated. The bronze and green auras are hidden. These 4 lizards are really calm. Their home is about to be destroyed. Should we add another wave of attacks? Bullsh *T. Whoever wants to go can go. Without receiving Lord Kill Jaden's order, I won't let my brothers go for nothing. The words of these 2 Void Lords also represented the thoughts of many Lords of the Burning Legion. That's right, as long as they died outside the Twisting Void, they could theoretically revive infinitely. This was on the premise that their souls could run back. 4 demons with almost infinite lifespans. There was the great achievement of the guy whose name was Taboo blowing up the Twisting Void Fortress 10,000 years ago. There was also Mount Hyjal in Azeroth, where Archimonde died. Not only were they afraid of death, but they were also afraid of reviving. This was because reviving would inevitably cause damage to the soul. It was fine once or twice, but if they revived too many times, the damage to the soul would naturally be severe, which would bring about a decline in strength. This was often how Void Lords were replaced. Now, other than the most belligerent Abyss Lords and Doomguards, many Demon Lords were a little hesitant. No one would have thought that Duque had actually calculated the frequency of the Burning Legion's attacks and played a trick right under their noses. Whether it was Krasus or Saffron as the capable subordinates of their boss, their auras were of the same origin. What Duque needed to do was to increase the elemental waves that they emitted. Alexstrasza was a nature element, and Maligos was mainly a frost element. After connecting to the magic net, they were about the same when observed from afar. Duque gambled that the Burning Legion spies could not go deep into the void fortress that the Titans had left for the dragons, and could only observe from afar. If he could not deceive the Burning Legion, Duque would fulfill his promise and immediately send the 4 back to the void battlefield. This was why the 4 Dragon Kings had the time to come to the underground cave to be thugs. In order not to scare Si Thun, Duque also asked them to suppress their strength and enter in human form. Alright, before giving Si Thun a surprise, I'll surprise my own people first. As they went deeper into the cave, everyone could clearly feel that the evil aura was increasing endlessly. A large number of tentacles drilled everywhere. Everyone could vaguely sense that the tentacles seemed to feel the pulse of the earth while injecting venom-like substances into every corner of the earth, even deep into the planet Azeroth. When the venom decayed everything, it would suck it back and use it as nutrients for its growth. He suddenly understood why Titan had beaten up the 4 great ancient gods back then and sealed them. If the cursed land's gate of darkness was the most straightforward form of absorption, causing everything to wither and all life to be extinguished, then the cursed land's gate of darkness was the most straightforward form of absorption. Then what Thun did was the darkest corruption and the most brutal plunder. Speed up. Under Duque's command, everyone suddenly found that the tentacles no longer drilled into the ground, sides, and ceiling of the passage. This was because all the tentacles had been directly mobilized by Duque to form magic and directly attacked from outside the walls. In the absence of interference, everyone could directly use the crystal to summon the insect mounts. 4-legged insects, fast and stable, it would be strange if they could. 4 N-shaped legs full of spikes, any girl would have goosebumps at the sight of it. However, in the desert area, there was no mount faster than this thing. These insects the size of small cars were summoned, and whether they were willing or forced, they could only obediently follow the orders of the crystal that contained their emperor's will and bitterly move towards the more dangerous depths at high speed. From the outside, Thun's nest was a huge ring-shaped building. Next to the not-so-exaggerated gate, Duque gave one last reminder: remember, the key is to disperse the formation. As long as we stand together, we will be infinitely connected by the rays of the eyeballs, and then we will all be wiped out. We, F***CK. Duque couldn't help but curse. Dog, H**T, that's right. The self-centered Maligos, who was pretending to be the best in the world, actually didn't listen to Duque and rushed in first. As the ancestor of Azeroth magic, Maligos boasted of being the king of magic. Needless to say, he didn't have a good attitude towards Duque. Even though Duque had deliberately avoided using his name when he advanced to become a demigod, and the range of the weave's usage avoided the dragons and fixed it on mortal races like humans, night elves, blood elves, and dwarves, it still didn't stop Maligos from being unhappy with Duque. Maligos' authority in magic had always been limited to the blue dragon race. This old man felt that everyone in the world who played magic had to listen to him. Perhaps in his heart, Duque was still the little morning star wizard he had met all those years ago, needing to kneel down and worship him. He could ignore all of Duque's achievements and all of Duque's efforts to protect this world. If you're so awesome, then fight Thun alone if you can. Duque scolded. He really scolded out loud. He had spent so much effort to use the time difference to pull 6 demigods to surround Thun. Did he think it was easy? The experts of the Alliance tribe were dumbfounded. The 3 dragon kings were flustered and exasperated. Wait, are you crazy? Alexstrasza, who had changed her name to Legolas, almost wanted to slap Maligos and drag him back. Maligos snorted coldly, completely ignoring the Red Dragon Queen. At this moment, Thun, who was in the middle of the huge circular hall in the darkness, slowly revealed its disgusting appearance. At first glance, it looked a bit like an incense burner. Its fat, brown body was full of thorn-like barbs. It was covered with dark purple eyes and yellow-black pupils that people with trypophobia most did not want to see. On the body with the base of the incense burner, there were more than 10 hooks that curved towards the sky. In the middle there was an even larger eyeball. This huge eyeball with a diameter of at least 7 stories slowly opened after sensing the arrival of Maligos in human form. It was hard to tell whether it was ridicule or sarcasm. Thun's voice directly crossed the void and turned into mental power that entered the minds of every challenger. However, the voice was clearly directed at Maligos. It was not like a declaration. It was more like a hint or even a curse. Maligos. Death is not far from you. You will die. You will betray your siblings. You will be abandoned by your siblings. You are too weak. Duque's heart skipped a beat. Chapter 1340. He didn't know if the words brother, sister, and friend in the Draconic language were synonymous, or if that was the original meaning. Thun's words were like a powerful mental suggestion, but the one who was most affected was Duke, the transmigrator. Duque clearly remembered what happened to Maligos later. In the game version of Wrath of the Lich King, Maligos believed that the world had been corrupted by creatures that used magic indiscriminately. He decided to destroy all creatures that used magic and even magic-related creatures. Obviously, Duque was now on the top blacklist of creatures that used magic indiscriminately. If this went on, there was no need for original history, or so-called prophecies. Just inference alone was enough to know that Duque and Malygos would fight. Although Duque didn't like Malygos, he really didn't want Malygos to die. The death of one more dragon aspect would weaken planet Azeroth's protective array by 20%. Even if a new dragon aspect was chosen, it would be impossible to fill the original gap. This was like changing to a small caliber screw. It could be inserted, but it definitely wouldn't fit. In the original history, the later dragon aspects became weaker and weaker. This was an indisputable fact. It wasn't until Nozdormu and his future darkened self perished together that the planet Azeroth's protective array was finally broken. Only then did the Burning Legion fully invade. Duque felt a headache coming on. However, he didn't have the time to care about things that happened so long ago. According to history, it would be many years before Malygos's brain went crazy. Theoretically, Thun wasn't Enzos, who was good at hypnosis and brainwashing. It should be fine, should be. On the other side, Malygos was furious. No more dragon aspects will betray their brothers and sisters. Traitors will be nailed to the pillar of shame forever. Thun. Don't think that just because you're a true god you have the right to sow discord between me and my brothers and sisters. The only thing worthy of you is a deeper destruction. In response to his angry roar, Malygos transformed. A pair of beautiful blue wings shot out from his back, and his limbs instantly turned into ferocious, sharp claws. Ice blue, fine and solid scales covered them. The expensive epic-ranked mage robe was instantly frozen and shattered into pieces of ice, revealing the body of a giant dragon with a tail growing out of its butt. In the blink of an eye, the arrogant mage had completely taken on the form of a dragon. Although his size seemed to be comparable to Thun's, anyone could feel that their auras were not on the same level. Even so, it was enough to astonish all the experts of the tribe. Everything was explained. No wonder Duque did not immediately take advantage of Thun's incomplete recovery after defeating the Twin Emperors and directly lead the Alliance's powerhouses to march. It was no wonder that after the Horde killed Azrian the Scarless, they did not immediately gather the Horde to attack. Instead, they were considerate enough to give them a full 3 days of precious rest time. It turned out that everything was just in passing. Duque had been waiting for the 4 dragon aspects from the beginning to the end. Malygos transformed, and the other 3 dragon aspects also transformed at the same time. 3 long, distant roars seemed to come from the War of the Masters 25,000 years ago. The battle where the titans of the Pantheon beat up the ancient gods was replayed today. Although the leader was no longer Sargeras, the Titan warrior, and he was not fighting against a group of powerful elemental lords like Ragnaros or several ancient gods who were in perfect condition, the 4 dragon kings appeared together to besiege the half-crippled Thun. This scene, which should have only existed in epics and legends, was happening in front of a crowd of mortals. It was hard to tell if it was excitement, ecstasy, or some other emotion. Strong emotional fluctuations, accompanied by the fierce vibrations of the surrounding elements, were transmitted to the depths of every mortal's heart. Everyone's hearts expanded and contracted greatly because of the excessive stimulation. Blood was strongly pumped from the heart, rushing to every corner of the body. The eyes of the weak gradually turned pitch black, and they greedily inhaled the slightly turbid air. The vision of the strong was filled with brilliance. They saw the agitation of the elements and the exaggerated confrontation. More importantly, they saw the boundary between mortals and gods. The absolute boundary that once felt unreachable did not seem so difficult to break through. As soon as the 4 dragons went up, the surrounding elements were instantly sucked dry. Malygos directly summoned an ice dragon made of pure frost elements. It pounced over with its fangs and claws bared and it bit down. The elemental dragon succeeded, but it also failed. Its bloody mouth bit off a large piece of Thun's flesh, and only a large gap could be seen in the lower body of the incense burner. But before Malygos could be happy for half a second, the entire elemental dragon was stabbed by a large tentacle that rose from the ground into the sky. The sky was filled with icicles, and even Thun's body was not frozen much. Thun's lower body, which was brown with a little pink, began to squirm disgustingly. In everyone's vision, Thun's entire body had grown larger, except for the large eyeball above. It was proliferating. Roar! Nozdormu used sand to form a dragon's body and fiercely swung Thun's tail. But halfway through, the tail was also blocked by a large tentacle that appeared out of thin air. Its tail was broken, and the sand that exploded had a great deal to do with time. This was because all the parts of Thun that were hit by the tail fragments began to wither. Alexstrasza was the most direct. She fiercely spat out dragon's breath as soon as she went up. However, her dragon's breath was immediately offset by a red blazing light that was as thick as a house that shot out from See Thun's bulging eyeball. The fierce battle between the Red Dragon Queen and the ancient god caused the most terrifying law shock. It was reasonable to say that this terrifying collision of power was enough to easily destroy a fortress and cause several blocks to collapse in the destructive shock wave. However, everyone only felt a moment of trance. The master of the Emerald Dream, the Green Dragon Queen Isra, made her move. With the strange and gentle sound of the wind, a green light spread further with the wind. The majestic walls of the underground palace of the Temple of Ankh-Karaj silently turned into powder and sank into the hard stone ground under their feet. The battlefield that appeared in front of the mortals was a huge hemispherical hole with a radius of at least a kilometer. Is this the Emerald Dream? Tyron showed a look of admiration. No. Isra's voice sounded in the minds of the mortals. No matter how arrogant I am, I would not dare to pull an evil ancient god into the Emerald Dream. I just used my natural power to forcibly change the surrounding landscape to make this place more suitable for dragons and mortals to fight. Chapter 1341. The power of a demigod was enough to move mountains and fill seas. The ground that had just been flattened, with a crash, the solid granite stones stacked up layer by layer like broken waves. The ground was covered with shocking cracks, as if it had experienced a terrible earthquake. At this time the heroes were a little hesitant. Duque shouted, "What are you waiting for? Enter according to the prearranged formation." Others might not know, but Duque knew best. The ancient god See Thun was disgusting not because of his powerful single-target attacks, but because of the endless situation. On the surface, the four dragon kings attacked together, and the mortals felt like they were just bystanders, but in reality they were not. See Thun was a terrifying existence that could destroy the world by himself. Not only did his tentacles affect the city, but they also greatly interfered with the movements of the four dragon kings. Whoosh! There was a loud noise and a giant claw tentacle appeared. The size of this enormous tentacle was no different from that of a 5-story tower. In front of this level of tentacle, the scales and dragon skin that the dragon kings were so proud of were no different from the armor of mortals. As long as it was hit, it would definitely be pierced and torn apart. A tentacle easily penetrated Nozdormu's thigh, and the dragon leg that weighed several tons suddenly exploded. If Nozdormu was a giant dragon with flesh and blood, he would probably have been seriously injured. Roar! The Time Dragon King roared angrily, and his thick tail swept over violently. However, the tail that weighed hundreds of tons did not break the tentacle. Instead, after a few trembles, the giant claw tentacle drilled back into the ground. When had the Bronze Dragon King ever suffered such a big loss? He wanted to drill into the ground and settle the score with that tentacle. Nozdormu? Alexstrasza stopped him. Nozdormu could only resentfully restore his dragon leg. It was true that he was a giant dragon made of sand, but it took time and energy to rebuild his body. It was obvious that the attacks of the four dragon kings had slowed down. The next moment, the tentacle that had just caused trouble came out again. This time, it changed its target to Isra, who had not used close combat. Although Isra had the least offensive moves among the four dragon kings, and did not dare to use the power of dreams to attack See Thun, her existence was the key. Because See Thun's attack was mainly a wide-area nature attack, Isra's nature resistance aura could effectively reduce more than 80% of the damage. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Isra's existence was the key. Just as Isra, who was casting a healing spell, discovered that the giant claw had suddenly popped out from the right side of her dragon abdomen, a large silver-colored dwarf rushed over and viciously struck the tip of the giant claw with a whirlwind hammer. It could not be said to be a tit-for-tat, as the Shorty King had used the avatar descending to increase his size by at least 5 times, but the Firelord hammer had increased by 10 times. When the God Equipment Giant Hammer, which was constructed from pure fire elements, turned from an elemental form into a solid form, and was then swung around by Magni's inhumanly terrifying strength with a hint of gold within the black hammer before smashing it down viciously, the visual stimulation that was filled with shock left every single mortal speechless. Bang! An earth-shattering explosion was accompanied by a flaming shockwave that splattered in all directions. Even though the size and the scene were completely different, the people present felt as if they were watching a child playing with a hammer to hit a gopher. With one strike of the hammer, a giant claw tentacle that should have been taken down by a dozen people had actually been charred black. Queen Sylvanas merely added an arrow and the giant tentacle was finished. It was like a leaking balloon, slanted and flattened on the ground. Without giving anyone the time to catch their breath, Thun in this life was obviously more violent. Squeak. There was a strange sound and everyone felt the ground shake violently. This guy wants to pull us underground? Nozdormu was shocked and angry, and had no choice but to attack angrily. No one knew what exactly happened. They only saw that the ground that was originally starting to collapse seemed to have been rewound, and the cracked areas were perfectly repaired. In any case, another Dragon King was being held back. As Alexstrasza dug out a large piece of Thun's body with a slap, she shouted at Duque, "Help us clean up those troublesome things." In addition to the giant claw tentacles, there were also tentacles with huge eyeballs. These things called the giant eye tentacles were also deadly weapons. If the team was too crowded, the mind whip shot out from the eyeballs would be like a chain of lightning, bouncing and spreading almost infinitely throughout the team. The only way to deal with these things was to use powerful long-range attacks. Ha! The Empress Dowager waved Ashbringer, and the brilliant golden light turned into a crescent moon. It swept across the battlefield and cut the eyeball tentacle in half at the root. This was not the end. The hideous eyeballs were still twitching violently on the ground, randomly pouring out deadly rays in all directions. Umph. The masters snorted in all directions at the same time. Queen Sylvanas' arrow. Gianna's ice. Sun King's fire. Woking's spear. The 4 attacks almost hit the giant eye tentacle at the same time, blowing it up in one breath. At the same time, Duque's performance was a little quiet. He did not look like a demigod at all. In the eyes of others, his performance was similar to that of other mortals. At most, he would play backstab, suddenly flash behind a giant eye tentacle, and give it a hard blow with the spiral sword. Similarly, Onyxia, who had transformed into Countess Katrana, also behaved like a peak radiant moon archmage, extremely low-key. What was Duque doing? Only the dragons knew. In the void, the Burning Legion suddenly received a secret report. Your source said that the 4 big lizards actually abandoned the void battlefield and ran to deal with the rioting ancient god Thun. The Void Lord Ambassador Helmer, who used to be a dread guard, muttered. Auras walked out of the shadows and said, "There is an 80% chance that the information is accurate. The Sleeping Dragon Temple has a close relationship with the leader of the Alliance, Duke Marcus. If it wasn't for us dragging the Sleeping Dragon Temple's power in the void, those big lizards would have already arrived at the Silithus battlefield." Queen Saloras said, "This is an opportunity. If we can break through the Sleeping Dragon Temple's defense line, it will definitely be a great achievement." Ambassador Helmer's face turned cold. "It's me, not we." He did not give the twins a good look. Ever since the twins made a mistake 10,000 years ago, their status was not as good as before. Now, in the eyes of other lords, they were just running errands and playing tricks. They could not represent Commander Kill Jaden. "Yes, it's you, the great Ambassador Helmer." The twins tactfully lowered their heads. Chapter 1342. Ambassador Helmer looked up slowly. "I did not receive Lord Kill Jaden's order to attack, so it's up to me whether or not to believe the so-called accurate intelligence." "Yes, that's right." The Gemini lowered her head even more. Their plan was indeed very well thought out. If Helmer was successfully incited and foolishly went to attack, it would be a success. Of course, it would be due to their accurate intelligence. If they failed, it would be Helmer who sent out the troops without permission. The demons of the Burning Legion could run as many corpses as they wanted. To be honest, no matter how many died, the leader of the demon army would not mind. The point was, to send in the demons they had to sacrifice the void warships. The demons were unlimited, but the warships were limited. It was not a lack of resources. After all, Chief Sa had taken almost all the warships of the Pantheon. It was a pity that he did not get the production line for the void warships. So while there were many warships, one destroyed meant one less. Helmer was not a simple-minded abyssal lord. Kill Jaden had painstakingly arranged for Helmer to lead the harassment war against Azeroth because he valued his intelligence. As a Dread Guardian, he had the appearance of an Apocalypse Guard, except that his entire body was dark green, and he had 2 huge bat wings. Because of the infusion of dark energy, he seemed to have a cold aura. He suddenly threw out a poisonous bait. "Since you believe in this intelligence, then you can borrow some void warships from me, and the demon army can also take some. In exchange, you must give me sufficient collateral." The Eridar Gemini was first overjoyed, then shocked. Telepathically connected, they looked at each other and quickly made a decision. Go for it. They had lost Kill Jaden's trust for a long time. In the Burning Legion where power struggles were so severe, it was already a miracle that they could survive until now. Countless male lords wanted to take them back as playthings or slaves, and countless female demons wanted to step on their corpses to rise, such as Mother Sharas of the Sylvanas. They had absolutely accurate intelligence that confirmed that the 4 dragon kings were now fighting Si Thun in the depths of the Ankh-Karaj temple. So they decisively bet a large number of soul stones. Those were high-quality souls they had collected from different planets and worlds over the past 10,000 years. While they did not bet everything, it was definitely 70 to 80% of their savings. They had no choice but to bet. In terms of strength they were far superior to Helmer, but they did not have the power. This was the difference. Looking at the Eridar Gemini's collateral, Ambassador Helmer smiled. With so much, even if killed Jaden were to question him, he would be able to answer to him. You can take away 2 void battleships, 10 void cruisers, 30 destroyers, and the corresponding demon army. The time limit is 10 Azeroth days. If the damage exceeds 50%, the authorization will be automatically revoked. Just as she was about to speak, she was stopped by Queen Salolas. That's right, the collateral they provided was more than enough to borrow twice their strength. But the military power was in Helmer's hands. The Eridar twins suddenly closed their eyes at the same time. Only the 2 of them could see the intense battle that was happening at the same time in another dimension. Alexstrasza bravely charged in front, tearing off pieces of Si Thun's flesh. Maligos used his comprehensive and violent magic to suppress Si Thun's regeneration. Nozdormu ruthlessly caused Si Thun's overgrown cells to age and die prematurely. Isra used a powerful natural aura to defend against Si Thun's attacks. This scene, this undeceiving elemental and divine power undulations were all clearly transmitted to the Gemini's senses through a certain observing eye. No problem. So be it. The Gemini quickly made a decision. Speed was the most important thing in war. Half an hour later, a small Burning Legion fleet with a long tail of green flames was teleported from the distant side of the galaxy to the void battlefield outside of Azeroth's atmosphere in one go. Don't be afraid. The Dragon Slumber Temple's 4 dragon aspects are not here. The ones left here are just some ancient dragons. Ancient dragons could basically fight to a draw with a Void Lord at the beginning stage. The Eridar Gemini were called intermediate, but they were demoted due to their defeat in the distorted void 10,000 years ago. In terms of strength, the 2 sisters were among the top in the Burning Legion. As long as the 4 dragon kings were not around, no dragon was a match for the 2 sisters. The invasion of the evil demons naturally triggered the alarm of the void fortress left behind by the Titans to guard Azeroth. Almost at the same time, the figures of the 4 dragon aspects paused for a moment. They really came. Alexstrasza was not angry but smiled instead. What's wrong? Sar, who was busy beating up the eyeball tentacles, suddenly turned his head. Nothing much. There really are evil demons that came to attack the void battlefield, Isra replied calmly. Then what should they do? Were the dragon aspects going to give up on this battlefield and run back immediately? Be it the Alliance or the Horde, every powerhouse knew the duty of the dragon aspects. They had always been the top priority when it came to defending against the Burning Legion. You guys. Just as Magni was about to ask, a shocking change occurred. Duque, who had been doing nothing all this while, flashed and ran behind a forgotten archmage, stabbing him with his sword without saying a word. The golden sword that looked like a spiral nail easily pierced through the chest of the former Silver Moon Council member. The surging divine power caused indescribable pain to the Great Lich's soul. The bystanders only saw that the Great Lich was in so much pain that his entire body almost arched backwards. The upper and lower parts of his dry lips were cracked to the maximum, revealing teeth that were slightly black. Duke Marcus, what are you doing? The most furious one was naturally the Sun King. He suddenly turned his golden staff and aimed it at Duque. Not just Sar and the other Horde powerhouses, even the heroes of the Alliance were stunned. What was Duque doing? Was he going to break off relations with the Horde and kill them all in one go? Was he going to challenge the true god Si Thun? Shock, disbelief, suspicion, fear, and all kinds of emotions intertwined among the mortals. In the next instant, everyone understood the answer. An eyeball suddenly popped out of the eye socket of the Great Lich who had been stabbed in the back. It was not an ordinary eyeball that the Lich had preserved using shadow magic. It was an observer's eye that belonged to the Burning Legion. In less than half a second after the eyeball popped out, it had already expanded to the size of a fist. The purple veins and whiskers around the eyeball also proved this fact. Holy light above, we're being watched? Benedictus exclaimed. Chapter 1343. That's right, all the scenes of the battle just now had obviously been transmitted to the Burning Legion through the traitor's specially replaced eyeball. Sal felt a wave of anger and humiliation. He had gone against the majority's opinion and forcibly brought the Forsaken into the tribe. He had valued the combat power of the Forsaken, but ultimately, it was because of the situation. He knew very well that the tribe's greatest enemy was not the Alliance. The greatest enemies ranked above the Alliance were Si Thun, the damned ancient god, and the Burning Legion. He would never forget what the Burning Legion had done on the Kalandor continent. Half of Grey Valley, the entire Fellwood Forest, had been destroyed by the Burning Legion. Even with the restrictions of high-ranking commanders, there were still demons who ran away or hid in the years after the Burning Legion invaded Kalandor, indiscriminately killing the Night Elves and the people of the tribe. Now, there was actually a traitor in the tribe's hero team that he should have trusted the most. How could he tolerate this? Go to hell, traitor. Sal leaped high and the hammer of destruction burst into blazing flames. With a leap hack that was deeply inherited from Grandpa Roar, not only did the hammer smash the observer's eye that had not escaped in time, but it also smashed the Great Lich's head into a rotten watermelon. Yep, a rotten watermelon. Hee hee. Mortals, no one can resist the Legion. The Great Lich's cold laughter echoed in the void. Stay. Anastrian could not keep his face any longer and took the initiative to attack. However, he was not a true warlock. His soul-binding technique was actually resisted by the Lich. No one expected Duque to attack again. To be precise, it was the elemental emissary under Duque's command who attacked. Duque raised his hand, and the figure of the Black Witch Farina suddenly appeared beside him. She raised her hand and used a more authentic, soul capture. The Great Lich's soul screamed and struggled, trying to break free from the soul vortex formed by the crimson crystal in Farina's hand. The Black Witch chuckled coldly, "Run, run if you can. You betrayed Azeroth. Your will is useless. Now, after repenting, you will become Master's servant and serve Master loyally. The most glorious thing in this world is to serve Master's cause forever." Farina's entrance was a pain in the ass for the mortal experts. How did the backbone of the cursing sect, who was originally loyal to Kel Thuzad, suddenly become Duque's diehard fan? Not only was she fanatical, but she also came to fight for Duque. Everyone could imagine what would happen to this traitor if he fell into the hands of such an evil woman. "Sal, give me this guy's soul. You don't have any objections, do you?" Duque asked as he swatted away a tentacle. "No problem." Sal was resolute and did not even look at the Sun King. "The problem now is not the Alliance and the Horde. I'm fine." Duque waved his hand. "Everything is going according to plan," Isra replied with a smile. Was it all part of the plan? Could it be that even the traitor among the Forsaken was part of Duque's plan? Sal, Wajin, Orgrim, and the Sun King were all shocked at the same time. Someone's changed. Duque slapped Onyxia, who was immersed in her sadistic fantasies, on the shoulder and woke her up. If there were no outsiders, Duque would even kick her on her perky and elastic butt. The formation that besieged Si Thun suddenly changed. Alexstrasza and Maligos were still attacking fiercely. Isra's figure seemed to be exiled by the magic of the warlocks, and her whole dragon body became illusory and transparent. However, everyone could still clearly feel her natural resistance halo, which was counteracting Si Thun's natural attribute attack. The most exaggerated one was Nosdormu, whose huge sand dragon body became slow. Although it was only a little bit, everyone could feel that this guy was already a good-for-nothing. "How dare you be distracted while fighting me? Are you looking down on me?" Si Thun let out an angry roar. "No. We didn't look down on you." With Duque's voice, Onyxia quickly became bigger. As the Black Dragon Princess, there was an absolute gap in strength between her and the 4 dragon aspects. As the closest in strength to the dragon aspects, she was qualified to succeed as the Earth Guardian. Even if she couldn't do as well as Nosdormu, it was not a problem for her to defend more and attack less. No matter how strong Si Thun was, it was impossible for him to completely ignore the attack of a genuine demigod creature. Damn it, the whole cave echoed with Si Thun's roar. In the Void battlefield, the Eridar twins' faces turned green. Because just when they ordered the Void battleship to release the demonic troops and spread out the formation, they suddenly felt a strong magic fluctuation. The magic turbulence that was surging enough to interfere with space was dominating the entire airspace. In the countless battles between the Burning Legion and the Dragon Race, the demons knew that there were only 2 existences in the entire Dragon Race who could do this. One was the dimensional Dragon King Nosdormu. The other was, in the Void Fortress, a dazzling icy blue light shone. The light was so bright that it was comparable to the light of the sun in an instant. A beautiful and gigantic dragon was standing at the entrance of the fortress, displaying its terrifying and oppressive figure. "I am Maligos. I am the incarnation of magic." The arrogant voice was transmitted to the Void battleship 10,000 meters away through the violent elemental fluctuation. That Maligos' body was bursting with a storm-like frost element. As soon as he appeared, he froze all the Void trash at the entrance of the fortress. This low-level Void Lord of the Apocalypse Guard turned to look in the direction of the Void battleship. His questioning voice reached the Eridar twins' ears. "Didn't you say that the 4 dragon aspects aren't here?" The Burning Legion and the dragon race had been fighting each other for so many years and knew each other very well. Every single dragon aspect was in existence with shocking strength, and they could easily take on a high-tier Void Duke on their own. Generally speaking, at least 3 high-rank Void Overlords were needed to stall a dragon aspect. And this was under the situation where the dragon aspects did not cooperate with each other. Once all 5 dragon aspects were present, with the support of the planet's protective formation, the Burning Legion would be helpless. They could only be cannon fodder. Impossible. How could Maligos rush back in time? Elises shouted in shock. Among all the dragon aspects, Alexstrasza and Maligos had the worst mobility. It was not easy to create a portal that allowed them to pass through. Moreover, Thun would not let them go so easily. What exactly happened? Chapter 1344. There was no time to waste on Gemini's Burning Legion. In the Void Fortress more dragons came out. In the Void, a sandstorm appeared out of nowhere. Countless gravel, and even broken warship fragments began to gather together, forming a behemoth. No demon was unfamiliar with this scene, because Nosdorm appeared like this every time. The King of Space and Time could appear anywhere he wanted, unless there was a stronger force that refused him entry. In the absence of Sargeras and Archimonde, no one would be able to stop Nosdormu unless Kil'jaeden personally intervened. Queen Soloraz's delicate body shook violently. "Alright, another Dragon King. Thun didn't catch the King of Space and Time, but what about the next one?" An illusory scene appeared in the Void. It was a green world that shouldn't exist outside the atmosphere. A beautiful green dragon stepped out of the illusion of the Emerald Dream. Who else could it be but Isra? Gemini was so shocked that she almost bit her tongue off. 3 of the 4 dragon aspects had already appeared, and the last one couldn't wait. As the fiercest and highest-ranking dragon aspect, Alexstrasza didn't appear every time. Unless the main force of the Burning Legion arrived, she wouldn't appear. This time they were 2 high-grade lords, and 3 of the 4 dragon aspects had already given face. It should be said that they were giving too much face. This face was too heavy, so heavy that they couldn't bear it at all. "Our spies have been discovered." "So what?" "Theoretically those big lizards can't make it back. Thun won't let go of the prey in its nest." Gemini had to take the gamble. They were betting too heavily, so heavily that it was almost impossible to turn the tables. Moreover, it wasn't like they could retreat if they wanted to. If the opposite Dragon King was the real deal, then they wouldn't be able to leave even if they wanted to. Bet. We can only bet. Bet on who? Maligos. If Nosdorm and Isra could escape from Thun through special means, Maligos was the least likely. The massive amount of magical elements that the King of Magic carried would directly affect the stability of the Arcane School's teleportation portal, which made it extremely difficult for him to pass through the teleportation portal in battle. Dozens of Void battleships opened fire, their demonic cannons gathering a huge amount of magic power. A few seconds later, hundreds of green beams of light pierced through the pitch-black sky and shot toward Maligos. The ice-blue giant dragon performed an amazing performance in the Void. He flapped his magnificent wings and nimbly dodged the most powerful beam from the main cannon. As for the beam from the secondary cannon, he did not even bother to block it as he charged straight at him. He was as domineering and terrifying as ever. Under Maligos's lead, the dragons dodged the cannon fire while attacking the Burning Legion's fleet. He was close. He was close. It was getting closer and closer. The dragons didn't have very good long-range weapons, but this was limited to existences other than Maligos. He fluttered his huge wings and raised 2 terrifying starlights. It was a frosty brilliance that looked like starlight. It gorgeously went against the green cannon's light and crashed into the 2 destroyers at the front. Although the 200-meter-long destroyers made a serpentine maneuver, It was meaningless in the face of magic attacks that could still be controlled after they were launched. Poof! The white light shot in. In less than a second, the entire black destroyer turned into a large, bloated and ugly eggplant. Then, countless white lights flowed out of the destroyer. The spots of light grew more and more intense. The next moment, the entire destroyer exploded just like that. There was no bright but fleeting explosion, no flying debris and demonic limbs, only a huge ice coffin in the shape of a sea cucumber. Just like Maligos had done for the past 10,000 years. He was as skilled as ever. He was as arrogant as he was in the past. You lied to me. The low-level Void Lords roared in unison. They were not direct subordinates of the Gemini twins. They were only willing to come out this time because the Gemini swore that the 4 Dragon Kings were not around. These low-ranking lords of the army were willing to come and try their luck. Now, not only did they fall into the trap, but the Gemini twins also fell into the trap. Nozdormu also showed his power. Dark space-time magic that was hard to see with the naked eye attacked, easily aging the metal of the cruiser's outer shells. The demonic cannons exploded after a few shots. The other wyverns attacked, using their sharp, hard claws to squash a void cruiser like a tomato, ripping open its intestines in just a few moments and destroying it. Isra made thousands of demons fall into a dream, foolishly becoming lambs for the dragons to slaughter. This battle was more than one-sided. This was simply a one-sided beating. The Gemini twins were stunned. They had been scheming all year round and were used to being scheming, but now they were being schemed against. They could not help but laugh at themselves. Were the two sisters getting worse and worse? In the past he was able to fool everyone, but now he was being used. At this time, the smart Gemini twins had figured out many key points. Duque indeed wanted to borrow the power of the dragons, but the 4 Dragon Kings would not be at ease if the external enemies were not stable. Just taking advantage of the time difference was not enough. Duque had dug a trap for the Burning Legion to jump into. The only difference was who jumped into it. The Gemini twins, unfortunately, became the one who got hit. Even though they did not understand how Duque could make Maligos appear in 2 places at the same time, they were sure that before the next regular harassment battle, the Dragon's Void Fortress would be truly empty. Unfortunately, there would be no one else who would be the Pathfinder. The Gemini twins could not even protect themselves, so how could they care about the other lords? Ah, Elises, did you notice that this is very similar to a certain human? It's infernal affairs, indeed. Humans don't have a lifespan of 10,000 years. With Nozdormu around, nothing is impossible. The Gemini twins fell silent. So what if they guessed correctly? Everything had nothing to do with them. Ever since the defeat in the ancient war 10,000 years ago, when the largest fortress in the Twisted Void was destroyed, they were pushed to the bottom by the angry Sargeras, and almost became the lowest existence in the army. In these 10,000 years, the army worked hard to recover, and they also tried their best to climb back up. After climbing for 10,000 years, they finally returned to this position. Who knew that they would suffer a crushing defeat again? They had already lost Kill Jaden's trust, and the days ahead would definitely be even more difficult. Not to mention that there was no evidence to prove that Duque was the infernal affairs. Even if there was, they would not expose it. In their hearts, a new idea was born. Chapter 1345. With the support of the magic net and the cover of the illusions, Saffron, who was just an ancient dragon, was able to put up the numbers of a dragon aspect in the form of an elemental creature. If there was an all-star MVP election for this battle, Saffron would definitely be the winner. Duque and Saffron combined their wills and swept through the scattered demons. Because Saffron wasn't a real dragon, he could do many things that dragons couldn't. With a beautiful S-shaped maneuver, Duque had Saffron dodge a series of demonic cannons. The battleship and 2 destroyers in front of him was the last organized resistance. There weren't many bullets, but they couldn't stop Saffron's advance. Saffron charged forward like lightning, his blue and white figure drawing a continuous arc in the void. He didn't stop for a moment. All the cannons were like fireworks in a grand festival. They were beautiful but useless. He brushed past Saffron, who was disguised as Maligos, by a hair's breadth. Dozens of magic arrays with complicated blue and white patterns hovered around him like loyal guards. They kept releasing elemental beams of different colors to kill the demons that were scattered around. He wasn't just shooting in a straight line. In the void he would slightly shake up, down, left, or right, and the beams would fly to who knows where after a certain distance. Saffron's concentrated attacks were like blooming chrysanthemums, full of arcs. If the demons weren't careful, they would be hit. Once mobility decreased, even the strongest demon was just a target. Don't come over. After I enter the battleship, just help me kill the other demons, Saffron ordered in the form of Malygos. There weren't many blue dragons in the void battlefield, but when their boss wasn't here and there were no new orders, the other 3 dragons would choose to follow the orders of a higher-level dragon. Everyone was just surprised that Malygos was so fierce today. First of all, the accuracy of his long-range magic had greatly increased. Then, why was he interested in these battleships that had destroyed who knew how many? As a creation of the Titans, the Burning Legion's battleship had the same structure as the one that a certain someone had boarded 10,000 years ago. If Saffron was a real dragon, it would not be easy for it to enter a warship that was more than 3,000 meters long. Not Saffron. He easily stuck to the outside of a demonic cannon, taking advantage of the gap between shots. The frost elements easily infiltrated the inside of the barrel. Originally, the battleships were piloted by the Titans and their creations, so they naturally had complete defensive measures. Unfortunately, the ones controlling the battleships were a group of crude demons. It wasn't an easy task to find someone who was willing to be a cannoneer among the irascible demons who advocated close combat but didn't have a high status. Those who could barely aim and fire their cannons were already qualified demon cannoneers. Of course, the little demon cannoneers couldn't understand what reverse charge was. When they reacted, a guy who looked exactly like Malygos in human form was already standing next to the cannon. His body was a humanoid made of frost elements, and the controller was Duque. With just a cold snort, the end of these imps had arrived. The intense collision between magic and the evil life form had caused the smell of blood to overpower the air purification ability of the warship's ventilation system. The silver-black corridor turned from colorless to colorful in an instant, drenching the surface. A faint ice shield covered Malygos from all directions without any blind spots. At the same time, a large amount of frost elements that looked like mercury surged and accompanied him. It was as if he was walking on the metal corridor of the battleship. The scene was as weird as it could get. 3 blurry Dragonians slowly rose from the wave of frost. These 2 fellows, who looked like dragon men but were actually elemental creatures, guarded Malygos from both sides and behind with double-headed machetes in their hands. Therefore, if any attacker wanted to attack him directly, they could only attack from the front. A few icicles shot out, easily dispersing the shadow arrows fired by a few Eridar warlocks. When he walked into a hall, a Lord of the Abyss came along the spacious hall, waving a double-headed beheading sword and charging at him. However, the powerful slash suddenly froze when it was 2 meters away from Malygos. It was as if there were 2 boulders weighing thousands of kilograms, one on the left and the other on the right, pressing down on the broad blade. Malygos, who was wearing an ice-blue robe, said softly, "Scram." This enormous demon, which weighed at least 10 tons, was sent flying faster than a kite with a broken string. Is this the strength of a Dragon King Guardian? A mysterious smile appeared on Malygos' face. It's not like, guess. That's what his expression said. Since it was a disguise, it had to be done perfectly. While completing the mission, Duque did not forget to ask for some benefits. Pretending to be Malygos and showing off his might was a requirement of the mission, but at the same time, it was convenient for a certain Dragon King to take the blame. 2 words came out of Malygos' mouth lightly: "Ice Seal." In the next moment, the ice elemental energy that surged out from the weave turned everything in sight into ice sculptures. The road to the bridge was now unobstructed. Malygos moved forward with his head held high. Be it the heavy gate or the complicated magic formation, nothing could stop him for even a second. All the defenses were destroyed under the impact of the violent elemental magic. He took 81 steps forward. A total of 81 traps were destroyed. When the last door fell down, Duke saw his target, the Eridar twins, just as he wished. The Gemini stared at Malygos for a full 3 seconds before sighing at the same time. "I knew it. You're not Malygos. That big blue lizard isn't as showy as you. I wasn't sure before, but now I'm completely sure. You're not Malygos. You're Duke Marcus, a newly advanced demigod who entered the divine realm as a mortal. Do you have anything else to say before you kill us?" Aureus and Queen Sailoras were convinced, but they knew that they would not be able to escape today, so they wanted to confirm it at the very last moment. Duque was not surprised that they were seen through. The Eridar Gemini were masters of disguise and working behind enemy lines. To them, his illusory disguise was clumsy. So, Duque removed the illusion and revealed a human body made of frost elements. However, the figure was exactly the same as Duque's. An elemental body, Saffron's soul and Duque's will. This combination surprised even the knowledgeable Eridar Gemini. Duque smiled. Make your choice, Gemini. Will your soul be destroyed, or will you leave behind a small hope for a comeback? Chapter 1346. The two identical beautiful faces of Aurelia and Celaras were shocked at the same time. They couldn't believe their ears. In the past 25,000 years, it had always been Eridar who incited the enemies to surrender and rebel. No one had ever dared to incite the core of the Burning Legion, the Eridar family, to betray the Burning Legion. At this moment, there were two junior Void Lords between Duque and Gemini. In addition, there were more than 30 demon guards and elite Eridar warlocks waiting for them. To finish off the demons, killing them was not enough. As long as their souls could return to the twisting nether, the demons could endlessly run back to their corpses. But what if their souls couldn't return? Before Gemini could react, the elemental energy around Duque suddenly surged. The high-purity ice elemental energy that was originally surrounding his body suddenly shot forward, and a silver spiral of frost shot out like lightning. The spiral energy took less than 1/100th of a second to travel more than 10 meters. When it reached the top of the demons' heads, it suddenly exploded like a bomb. The frost elementals, which were originally in a slurry, turned into a blossoming bomb. The radius of the explosion expanded by at least 100 times. The dense frost elementals penetrated everything in their path at lightning speed. Of course, the objects they were referring to were the two Void Lords and the Demon Guards. In the blink of an eye, the two Void Lords, including the two Void Lords, were all obliterated within the 100-yard radius of the elemental spiral. But this was only the beginning. When the frost element seemed to have expanded to its maximum range, it suddenly continued to shrink inwards until it shrunk into 9 fine spiral cones. Then it continued to explode outwards at an even greater speed, piercing through even more demon guards. Then they shrank and expanded again. This happened 3 times in a row. The maximum range of the frost elementals had expanded to almost the entire bridge. When the last spiral of frost elementals covered the entire bridge except for Gemini, they did not continue to spread. Instead, they gathered back and condensed into silver bullets that shot towards the demons that had yet to fall to the ground. After penetrating the ice elementals of the demons and unleashing every last bit of the spiral energy, the ice elementals finally exploded and fell back to the undulating elemental wave beneath Duque's feet. The silver-white frost reflected the lights on the bridge, making Gemini's face increasingly gloomy. All of this took a long time to describe, but in fact, from the time Duque released the frost elemental spell to the time he cleared the area, only 3 breaths had passed. A large number of demon elites, including 2 low-grade demon lords, had disappeared without a trace. The difference in strength was very obvious. Being hung up and beaten was never the scariest thing. The worst that could happen was death. Every demon firmly believed so. What was terrifying was another scene that happened in a domain that mortals couldn't reach. In his spirit vision, the souls of the devils whose bodies had been destroyed and whose souls were about to slip back into the distorted void were suddenly intercepted. A huge illusory human palm appeared out of thin air and blocked the soul gate that had opened in the distorted void. The palm had a strange suction force, emitting gravitational waves like a black hole, and captured the souls of dozens of demons, including the souls of the 2 Void Dukes. Such a skillful technique of capturing souls. This was the domain of the Eridar warlocks. However, Duque's next move was to summon a dazzling golden flame. The flame with a holy aura roasted these twisted evil souls. Oh! Except for the 2 Void Dukes, all the souls of the devils had completely disappeared from this universe. There was no resurrection. Even the devil leader in charge of the distorted void did not know why some of the devils should have died, but their remnant souls did not return to the distorted void. In the boundless universe, losing a few dozen demon souls was nothing at all. In fact, with the size of the Burning Legion, Kill Jaden wouldn't even frown if a few high-grade demon lord souls were missing, as long as it wasn't a core mission, let alone dozens of low-grade souls. However, the Gemini were very familiar with the technique and hand gestures that Duque had used to capture the souls. It was very simple. They were the ones who had personally taught this to Duque. This scene gave the Eridar Gemini the impression that the world was collapsing. You are Infernal Affairs? The special name, Infernal Affairs, had too many special meanings in the Burning Legion. After the Burning Legion had wreaked havoc in the universe for 15,000 years, he was the only one who had caused irreparable damage to the Legion. One had devoted himself to the Legion, but he had ignored the Legion's sole counterattack. At the crucial moment, he had turned against the Legion and foiled Sargeras' plan to descend into the world of Azeroth. He had even blown up the Legion's largest void fortress. If the name, Infernal Affairs, was combined with the name Duke Marcus, the Gemini were shocked to find that the legend of this name was still continuing. In Karazhan he had stabbed Medivh, who had been possessed by Sargeras, to death, and kicked the Burning Legion's leader, the King of Demons, into the bottomless abyss. In the Battle of Mount Hyjal, he had also stabbed Archimonde, one of the two commanders of the Legion, in the chest with a magnificent backstab. They had thought that another person who could be called the enemy of the Legion had appeared in the world of Azeroth. Who knew that these two people were actually the same person? If it had been someone else, the Gemini might have argued. Even if they lost, they would have ruthlessly suppressed the other party's momentum. The pursuit of billions of demons. The boundless rage of the King of Demons. The hatred of the Legion that had destroyed countless stars. But, if the other party was Duque, who had killed two of the Legion's 3 powerhouses and blown up billions of demons, then threats and harsh words would all be a joke. In response to the Gemini's question, Duque did not answer yes or no. The air became silent for a while. The Gemini's heart skipped a beat. At times like this, the air suddenly became silent. After all, this meant trouble. The Gemini looked at each other. Queen Selaras said, "Sir Marcus, what do you want to obtain? Even if you die and return to the distorted void, what can you obtain?" The Gemini trembled and did not answer. Duque continued, "Is it Kill Jaden's final disappointment? Or the right to be the vanguard in the next battle? Oh, maybe it will even make history for Eridar's female demons." The Gemini trembled even more violently. Duque did not show them his bargaining chips, but pointed out that they did not exist. This was even more unbearable for them. For Eridar, who was famous for conspiracies and dark magic, this was the greatest humiliation and failure. As for what the Gemini thought about this, the Burning Legion never cared about the thoughts of the losers. Chapter 1347. In the original history, the Eridar twins were like fish in water until the warlocks captured them when they were rebuilding the Black Sickle Council. They were enslaved by whipping them and using demonic spells. That was how they were forced to become enemies of the army. It was not easy to make these two sinister and cunning female demons betray the Burning Legion, because Kill Jaden was the most vengeful. Didn't you see how Kill Jaden, commonly known as the Egg, chased after the Lich King for dozens of years? They were unwilling to betray because the price was too high. How to lower the price of the Gemini's betrayal was a skill. The staunch supporters of the royal path would choose to strengthen themselves. Duque, who had a high and low moral integrity, was already giving them face by not taking the evil path. Why would he talk about morality with the demonesses? He directly pointed out their weakness. Their repeated failures had made Kill Jaden lose patience with them. They could either become cannon fodder or rely on Duque. There was no third option. Although the Gemini's current predicament was all because of Duque, Duque threw out the bait to force the Eridar Gemini to betray them, not because he wanted to save the demonesses, but because he wanted to destroy the Burning Legion more efficiently. Of course, the ones who understood their own people the most were their own people. After being a Void Duke, Duque had a deeper understanding of the power struggle among the demons. Similarly, Duque, who was familiar with the original history, had a more accurate grasp of the Gemini's personality. "Don't worry, I won't ask you to be a meat shield or a vanguard." Duque's words struck a chord in the Gemini's heart. In history, the Black Sickle Council, which was made up of warlocks, was extremely weak. One abyssal lord had destroyed almost the entire Black Sickle Council. The shaman then discussed life with the 4 elemental lords and formed a pan-Azeroth formation to fight against the Burning Legion. The Black Sickle Council did not have much to offer. They could only capture the poor Eridar Gemini and use them as warriors to fight. Unbeknownst to them, although the Gemini had great magic attainments, they did not like to fight. The Gemini were still best at scheming. Even if they were forced to fight against a strong enemy, they would still want a strong vanguard to fight at the front. In a sense, Duque's promise that he didn't need them to fight head-on was already an enticement. So when Duque said, "I want you to provide the Burning Legion with the absolute truth every month," the twins weren't surprised at all. Sure. No problem. Wasn't it just intelligence? Just give it to him. As long as he could get out of this predicament. Gemini's promise was so straightforward that Duque sneered out of anger. Yes, there were many types of spies, but the most famous ones were naturally double agents. Gemini had never been someone who knew what loyalty was. Perhaps they thought that he, Duque, was still too young and easy to fool? Or, it could be said that the information they gave him was true, but the order was secretly changed. In this way, even if every piece of information was true, by changing the order to mislead, they could still come up with the opposite conclusion. If Duque wasn't an experienced transmigrator, he had watched spy movies, he would have been fooled in minutes. If this still couldn't be confirmed, Duque had been using the System Elf's lie detector to give an unqualified evaluation, which further confirmed Duque's thoughts. Duque's face darkened. It seems that you don't know me well enough and think that I'm a master who is easy to fool. Since I've chosen you as my targets, you have no room to resist. I hope that in the coming days you can remember this. The twins were obviously shocked that their thoughts were seen through. Because conspiracies had nothing to do with power, it was purely the experience of wisdom and experience. They couldn't understand why a human who was only a few decades old would suddenly think that they had a trick up their sleeves. However, if Duque wanted to make a move, they wouldn't just sit and wait. Auras used the violent, flame scorch, to set off a sea of fire toward Duque. Sololas used the dark and obscure shadow blade, to sneak behind Duque and attack him. The twins' tacit cooperation was really amazing. Although there were all kinds of attacks from Gemini in all directions, Duque actually didn't need to do anything. He just needed to follow his heart and point out the general direction to deal with them, and the elemental emissaries would naturally do the work for him. In front of him, the fire demon manager Majori suddenly appeared and used an exquisite and magical unknown fire magic to surround the front half of Duque's body in a hemispherical shape. Not a single bit of the female demon's flames could splash into the defense constructed by Majori's. Instead, her flames were swallowed and became part of the fire element controlled by Majori's. Behind him, the Black Witch Farina, who suddenly appeared in front of Duque's back, didn't move her feet, and her whole body turned into a dark human figure. As soon as the shadow energy from all directions got close, the magic-constructed shape collapsed, and like moths flying into a flame, they were sucked into the beautiful and coquettish figure. Shock immediately froze on Gemini's face. They had imagined that there would be a gap between them and a demigod, but they didn't expect the gap to be so huge. In the elemental domain, they were the ones who were completely beaten up. Unless they could find a form of power that was completely different from Duque's, they had no chance of winning. Duque sneered and raised his left hand. Don't think that only Kill Jaden can control the soul and make anyone whose soul is captured suffer a fate worse than death. I know this trick too. Unlike the ever-changing and more basic elemental magic, shadow magic could be said to be Duque's cruelest trick. Since the opponent was a demon, Duque had no scruples. He sublimated the tricks from the Burning Legion and used them on Gemini. Dark energy was terrifying. The essence of dark energy was to burn the life and soul of a creature and turn it into energy. The soul shatter, which was derived from negative and crazy soul magic, inherited the cruel characteristics of the warlock magic. As long as more fire element was used as the basic fuel, it could ignite all the souls in the world. Almost instantly, Gemini's whole body was suddenly ignited. It was as if there was a black hole in her body, endlessly sucking in their souls to continue the burning of the flame. At the same time, countless small holy light spiraling swords flew out of Duque's body and flew in all directions in a magnificent and complex trajectory. Finally, they landed on Gemini and cut their bodies. This was a double torture of the soul and the body. And the third move, Mind Blast. Chapter 1348. This psychic blast was not the usual psychic blast. The signature skill of the Shadow Priest would not cause too much damage to the Gemini who was good at using dark energy and shadow. The core of the psychic blast was the terrifying mental impact. The impact was secondary and the private goods mixed in was the main point. In the image, Kill Jaden, with only half of his body exposed from the portal, lay dead again and again in the Sunwell Highland. The Egg Elder roared, struggled, and angrily used its signature skills. There were many skills that the Egg Elder had not used for more than 20,000 years. Through the System Genie's 3D imaging, the image was almost completed frame by frame. Then, using the blurry feeling of a certain someone traveling through time and space, the quality of the image was degraded to create a more realistic effect. The final finished product was this scene where the Burning Legion was defeated once again. In the Gemini's heart there was a huge wave of emotions. Because of the burning of the soul and the body, the pain was unbearable, but the collapse of the faith in the heart was the biggest blow to them. As the intelligence experts of the Burning Legion, even if they were no longer in an important position, they still vaguely understood the possible next step of the Legion. After the Alliance guarded the Dark Portal, The Legion changed their target and no longer focused on attacking the Dark Portal, which had the weakest defense in Azeroth. Instead, they tried to find a way to weaken the planet's defense, and on the other hand, inspired by the ancient war 10,000 years ago, they looked for a high-intensity source of magic similar to the Well of Eternity to support a more powerful portal. Archimonde had come to Azeroth through the portal twice. Although it ended in failure, this approach had been proven to work many times. The Sun Well, which had part of the magic of the Well of Eternity, was obviously the next target of the Legion. Now that Duque had announced to them the fate of Kil'jaeden being killed in the Sunwell Highland, how could the Gemini not be shocked? In this way, was this man who had become a demigod not destined to destroy the three heads of the Burning Legion? If even Kil'jaeden was defeated, and if Duque came up with some strange idea and blew up the Twisted Void, then the Burning Legion would really be finished. If the Burning Legion had to choose the most likely nemesis, Duke Marcus was definitely worthy of it. Alright, now that I've displayed my wisdom and muscles and even brought out the lethal weapon known as Fate, it's time to make a decision. Gemini suddenly discovered that the pain in her body instantly disappeared without a trace. Their limbs were all scorched black and they lay heavily on the ground, their bodies drenched in sweat. Ignoring the weakness of their bodies, they struggled to support their arms with their elbows against the floor of the bridge so that they could look up at the demigod, an existence even more terrifying than a true god. Although Azeroth and the other true gods were strong, weren't they still beaten by Sargeras back then? There had never been anyone like Duque who could foresee the enemy. If he could foresee everything, in theory all conspiracies would be ineffective against him. If they were still the capable subordinates of Kil'jaeden more than 10,000 years ago, they might be interested in challenging their ultimate enemy, Duque, to see if he had really expected everything. Unfortunately, things were different now and they no longer had the confidence to do so. Gemini looked at each other and said at the same time, "You'll get the information you want." Very good. Duque raised his chin slightly and looked down at the Eridar Gemini at his feet. Send the information to the Karazhan. Use any method to send it to a certain heroic spirit. After saying that, Duque began to approach the control area of the bridge and tried to put his hand on the control panel. It's useless. Queen Saloras smiled bitterly. Do you think that after you sneaked into the Twisted Void and did so many things, the Burning Legion really didn't have any countermeasures? Duque raised his eyebrows. Alesis continued, all battleships are installed with at least one set of countermeasures. Once the system determines that the intruder's strength is far greater than the demon on the ship, it will start the self-destruct sequence. In fact, before you attacked the bridge, the self-destruct system had already been activated, and all the important data had been destroyed. Duque was like a dog. It wasn't easy for him to come to the void, and the Dragon Slumber Temple had even allowed him to enter the magic net. He had come to cause trouble in the name of official business, but he was actually intercepted? Why hasn't it self-destructed yet? Sargeras ordered the creation of this system to cause more damage to the enemy, and we haven't completely lost the ability to fight. However, it won't be long. Almost as soon as Saloras finished speaking, Duque's system genie began to jump with warning prompts. Warning. Warning. High energy reaction detected. The possibility of the Void battleship self-destructing is 99%. Duque's face darkened and he snorted. Then Duque made his move. The icy starlight was like the tip of a spiral sword, and the infinitely extending ice was an extension of the sword tip. The white light that surged out like a volcanic eruption instantly filled the entire bridge. The Gemini screamed at the same time. They could clearly feel that their souls had been frozen, and then a large piece had been ruthlessly cut out. Kil'jaeden had kept a portion of their souls in the distorted void, and now a large piece of their souls had fallen into Duque's hands. Just now, Duque had used his actions to prove that since Kil'jaeden could destroy them by igniting their souls, he could do it too. In a sense, the worst situation had occurred. They had been strapped with explosives, and there was more than one person who could press the button. From this moment onwards, they were really walking on a tightrope between a mountain of knives and a sea of fire. If they were not careful, they would be consigned to eternal damnation. Of course, Duque wasn't that kind of disgusting boss. He wanted the horse to run fast, but he didn't want the horse to eat grass. As their bodies were being destroyed, the Gemini suddenly discovered to their surprise that the amount of their souls had decreased, but their strength had increased. Before they could cheer, their bodies were pierced by the icicles. Then, their graceful bodies, along with the collapse of the ice and the explosion of the battleship, turned into dust in the universe. Elemental bodies didn't fear explosions. Duque turned back into Maligos's dragon form. After leaving the explosion range of the Void battleship, he sensed the surroundings and found that the battlefield was basically clean. The adult dragons of the tricolor dragon tribe, under the leadership of the ancient dragon, surrounded the last demons that tried to resist. At this moment, Nosdormu and Isra flew over. The three demigods communicated with each other mentally. Did it work? Nosdormu asked. It should be no problem. This can at least buy us 24 hours for Azeroth. Duque nodded. That's great. Isra was a little excited. Chapter 1349. From the Burning Legion's point of view, since the Eridar Gemini had been used as cannon fodder, it proved that the 4 dragon aspects that should have been in on Karaj were still in the Void battlefield. So it didn't matter if they were defeated or not. After all, they had already completed their task of delaying the dragon aspects. What Duque needed to do was to make use of the time difference. At this moment, deep within the Karaj Holy Temple, the fierce battle was still going on. Ha ha ha. You will all die. Those who go against my will be destroyed. From the sound of it, it sounded like a vicious villain announcing his evil declaration. However, Sithun's voice revealed an inhuman coldness, as if hinting at its master's mood swings. No one could imagine how twisted the mind of an existence that had been sealed for 25,000 years would be. Ever since he lost the Battle of Dominators and was sealed, Sithun had been suffering for far too long. From the unbridled existence of the Dark Empire, he had become a forgotten existence. He couldn't wait to announce his return to all the intelligent creatures in Azeroth. And the best gift for his return was naturally the strongest demigod in Azeroth. Perhaps it was because his sealed power wasn't easy to unseal. Or perhaps he simply wanted to spread fear and despair. Other than fiercely attacking the 3 demigod dragons, Sithun still spent a lot of time ruthlessly torturing the mortals. Arg. A Forsaken warrior who had been a Beastman chief in his previous life was accidentally stabbed by the giant claw's tentacle. The sharp claws, coupled with the terrifying impact, easily pierced through his superior armor. Gotcha. Everyone within a few meters could clearly hear the sound of that guy's spine shattering. As a skeleton warrior, his skeleton was everything to him. Now his entire body was like those skeletons that were hung on the city gates as a warning to the public, being lifted up high. In the next second, the eyeball's tentacle moved closer, and the natural ray was injected into his mouth at almost 0 distance. The surging power of lightning rushed towards the core of his soul. In less than 2 seconds, a former chief, now a Forsaken warrior, disappeared from the world forever. Damn it. Old Howlgrum dashed over and slashed with a powerful horizontal strike. Against Sithun, jumping around randomly was very likely to become a target for the tentacles of the eyeball. However, as an experienced old warrior, Grom's every move was so concise that it reached the point of returning to the basics. Looking at the space, he even had the time to make a 360-degree turn to increase the power of the axe. The tentacles of the giant claw, which had already suffered from repeated attacks, finally exhausted the last of its life force under the axe. It collapsed to the ground like a deflated balloon, and a large amount of pus flowed out of every wound. Such a fierce battle was only a microcosm. The focus of the true battle was still the 3 dragons and 1 ancient god. Giant dragons, creatures at the top of the Azeroth food chain. Dragons were strong, but they were never invincible. When encountering creatures that were similar in size to them and were not afraid of dragon breath, the dragon's long and slender limbs became their weakness. In this hemispherical underground space with a radius of 1,000 meters, it seemed extremely vast, but for the dragons, it was still narrow and lacked space to maneuver. When Nosdormu and Isra left, Duque immersed his mind in the magic net to control his clone in the Void battlefield. The battle situation became worse. Even though Sithun's strength had not fully recovered, as a powerful tentacle monster ancient god, group battles were his forte. On the other side, Alexstrasza and Malygos clearly did not cooperate with Onyxia. At first, the 3 dragons simply divided the battlefield into 3 equal parts, each occupying 120 degrees. They soon realized that this did not work. The experienced Sithun had long since hated attacking the Red Dragon Queen. As a life giver, she had almost unlimited recovery ability. Onyxia, on the other hand, was different. As a demigod dragon, Onyxia's strength was on the lower end. She could not compare to the 5 dragon aspects, who were at the peak of demigod combat power. During the battle, she also encountered a problem. She needed to fight with Malygos for the control of the elements in the surrounding space. What was worse was that her control of the fire element, which she was best at, was practically fighting with Maligo's favorite ice element. The situation in front of her was a classic case of 1 + 1 = 2. And when he keenly noticed that she was seriously injured and had not fully recovered, Thun immediately focused his attacks on the Black Dragon Princess. Rumble. First, 8 giant tentacles burst out of the ground, covering Onyxia from 8 directions. She had no choice but to flap her wings and fly into the air. After all, in a competition of brute force in front of an enemy of similar size, the absolute strength of the dragons was at a disadvantage. In the next moment, more than 20 tentacles of the giant eye suddenly broke through the ceiling of the cave, and the eyeballs under the purple eyes shot out beams of light at the speed of light. The low frequency of the shots had the sharpest destructive power. Even if it was not concentrated, it was still an attack that had to be avoided. At this moment, Onyxia was shocked to find that she had been forced into a dead end, because Thun's largest eye was staring at her without blinking. This was like hunting, where the released hound drove the prey to the hunter's gun. Not good. Onyxia flapped her wings 3 times in an attempt to use irregular flight trajectory to avoid Thun's ultimate move. The giant eye's rotation was too fast, and as a giant dragon the target was too big. There was no way to avoid it. At this moment, everyone saw Thun's large eye bulge, and then a wide-area bombardment that covered 2 football fields followed. That thick red beam of light was no less than a full-force attack from the city in the sky Dalagen. This terrifying attack from the main cannon of the stronghold looked like a solid object. It was as if Thun had taken the red laser sword from Star Wars and stabbed it directly at Onyxia. In just 1/100th of a second, it conquered the distance of 500 meters and stabbed at the Black Dragon. The only thing the Black Dragon Princess could do was breathe out her famous deep breath in an attempt to compete with energy. Unfortunately, the strength of the 2 sides was not on the same level from the beginning. The blazing dragon's breath seemed weak under Thun's main cannon, which was even hotter. Onyxia's deep breath, which gathered all of her strength, finally failed after resisting for a few hundredths of a second. The beam of light pierced through the dragon's breath and went straight in the direction from which the dragon's breath came. It went against the flow and blasted towards Onyxia's head. The rippling fire elements even set the surrounding space on fire in an instant. Onyxia was shocked. "No, I don't want to die like this. If my ultimate fate is still death, then what's the point of me being a mount?" Chapter 1350. Onyxia already knew that Duque was going to fight against the Burning Legion, and she only needed to hold on for a while. Who would have thought that Thun would be so fierce? Its attack pattern was the same as Duque had said, but the number of tentacles had increased by several times. 1 giant claw tentacle could easily make a mountain giant kneel, and 1 ray of light from the giant eye tentacle could make an ancient dragon enter a state of near death, doubting the dragon's life before it died. For a moment, Onyxia began to wonder if she had hugged the wrong person. If she had to die bitterly to be a capable mount, then she might as well have been stubborn from the start. At the last moment, just as the Black Dragon Princess began to let her imagination run wild, an angelic voice suddenly rang in her ears. "Transform." That was her Duque's voice. Onyxia had never realized that her master's voice was so pleasant to the ears. "Whoa, I didn't suffer in vain after being tamed so many times." Without any hesitation, Onyxia quickly shrunk and transformed into a human. Alexstrasza, who was rushing over to help, was shocked. Onyxia's ultimate transformation spell had yet to reach maturity. Transforming into a human would certainly reduce the area of attack, but at the same time, her defense would inevitably be greatly reduced. If she was hit in her dragon form, there might still be some scraps left, but if she was hit in her human form, there would be nothing left. Immediately, the Red Dragon Queen saw the purple and blue light that appeared behind the princess at the critical moment, the light of the portal. Her heart immediately returned to her chest. This kid is finally back. Duque suddenly pulled and immediately pulled the humanoid Black Dragon out of Thun's main cannon's killing range. However, Duque only had time to pull her into the spatial crack before the terrifying ultra-high energy tore open the portal that Duque did not have time to close. The berserk magic power and divine power that had nowhere to vent easily caused a small-scale collapse in that part of the space. Even with a Tiche, Duque could not protect this spatial tunnel. In an extremely embarrassing situation, Duque held the staff in his left hand and pulled with his right hand, using almost all of his strength to pull the Black Dragon Princess out of the spatial tunnel. Bang! The bystanders only saw a flash before their eyes, and the Black Dragon that was supposed to be hit disappeared. Then they saw Duque suddenly rolling around with the mage who had transformed into Countess Katrana. Whoa! Onyxia was pinned under him in an M-shaped position. Ah! When Duque came back to his senses, his face was full of embarrassment. The dragon under him blushed and whispered, "If you want to tame a dragon, can we talk about it after defeating Si Thun?" Duque was speechless. Nozdormu and Isra entered the arena once again. The two giant dragons that tore through space were very eye-catching. Only Orgrim whispered to Thrall, "I suddenly have a good idea. If you can deal with a certain dragon king like Duque did with Onyxia." Just then, Alexstrasza suddenly showed her power and bit off a tentacle of the giant eye that had reached over to seek death. In the next second, because the red dragon wanted to expel Si Thun's evil divine power, it used the power of life to evaporate the foreign substance in its mouth, causing the dragon's mouth to overflow with thick mist. Looking at the bloody mouth that was flowing with blood and Si Thun's pus, Thrall's face darkened. He shook his head like a rattle and refused to do anything. So, it had to be said that there was something called talent. Humans' talent in making friends was not to be underestimated. Focusing his attention back, Duque suddenly found that Si Thun was far more difficult to deal with than he had thought. In Warcraft there were so many versions and there were so many bosses that people almost couldn't remember their names. There were not many that could be branded in the minds of players and make countless players cry. Si Thun was definitely one of the best. Duque didn't remember if Si Thun was ranked first, but he was definitely in the top 3. In the earliest version of the game, Si Thun was simply unbeatable. No guild had any way to deal with it. Now, fate seemed to be repeating this history that would torment people to madness. The 4 dragon aspects attacked together, but Si Thun was not at a disadvantage at all. So what if his body was injured? Its ability to recover seemed to be endless. Its body could be regenerated if it was bitten off, and its tentacles could also be regenerated if they were broken. Everyone even had the illusion that they were not fighting against a powerful monster, but rather planet Azeroth itself. No matter how much damage they dealt to Si Thun, it could be replenished with energy from the planet and regenerate indefinitely. The only good news now was that the void battlefield had been settled. The 4 dragon aspects could now fight with all their might. At the same time, Duque also made a move. "Don't fight with me for the control of the elements." Seeing that Duque was about to attack, Malygos warned Duque fiercely. "Ehehehe. A single sentence of, 'dragon that angers me' will be in danger." For a moment, a scene appeared in Duque's mind. In Stormwind City's King's Valley, the hanging dragon head had turned into the blue head of Malygos. *CK. Malygos, you claim to be the king of magic, but what are you doing now? A wide area cone of ice was sent over, and 70% of the magic power was in the air, more than 20% was resisted by Si Thun, and less than 10% caused actual damage. Duque rolled his eyes. That's right. Malygos considered himself the world's strongest ruler of magic, and in terms of magic power output, he was indeed above Duque. If Duque's magic power output per unit of time was compared to a train with a total load of thousands of tons, then Malygos was at least a cargo ship with a load of hundreds of thousands of tons. But it was precisely because of the difference in magic power demand that it seemed that Malygos' magic damage was higher. The dragon aspects didn't have a system elf, so it was impossible to calculate that in terms of magic power, Duque's damage was higher. Moreover, the dragon aspects were all siblings, so they worked better together. Okay, for Alexstrasza's sake, I'll hold it in. Duque was a demigod, so of course he couldn't just be a bystander. Didn't he see that after Onyxia got up, she turned back into her dragon form and changed to cleaning the tentacles at the edge of the underground cave? A thought popped up in Duque's mind. He acted on it. All of a sudden, a huge illusory three-dimensional magic network formed under Duque's feet. It was like a spider's web as dense as a hedgehog's. 6 types of elemental light bloomed at the same time. Malygos turned his dragon head and almost wanted to curse, but he suddenly realized that Duque didn't occupy the magic he needed. The magic that Duque used came from different corners of the elemental domain. The elemental world was very vast, and as a pure dimensional elemental world, not to mention a demigod, even a dozen true gods couldn't instantly use up the power of an elemental world. Chapter 1351. For the sake of convenience, the point closest to Azeroth was usually used to open the passage to the elemental realm. Because there was magic flowing all year round, those points were also the easiest. Now that Duque had avoided these magic absorption points, Malygos naturally lost the right to scold Duque. With a cold snort, the Blue Dragon King turned to focus on attacking Sea Thun. Groups of magic elements gathered on the battlefield at a speed visible to the naked eye. They quickly condensed into something like a dark cloud, and then, accompanied by a thunderous sound, a sudden hail poured down. They constantly combined with each other in the air, forming a sharp existence like a sharp sword. Almost instantly they pierced through the tentacle forest that had just risen. The hail was endless, and as the elemental group expanded, it continued to extend in all directions. Dozens of ice prisms the size of ballistae pierced through the tentacles of the eyeball, and flesh and blood flew everywhere. Sea Thun's natural lightning magic and ice elements in the purple eyeball clashed fiercely, causing an even bigger explosion. The tentacle limbs that were blown away fell on the heads of the people around them like a landslide. These corrosive broken limbs were definitely not good things. For a moment, there was a lot of screams, and the allied healers were immediately busy. Kalia had improved a lot. In this situation she did not chant a long and stinky incantation to activate a large area of effect, prayer of healing. Instead she quickly cast, Holy Word, Shield, on the unlucky ones in the center. A translucent shield protected them from further damage caused by the sputtering pus. When the 7 guys all had shields, it was just in time for the Holy Knights to quickly heal them with Holy Light Flash. The chain of healing could be said to be perfect. Every unlucky guy cast a grateful look at Kalia. Seeing that Malygos didn't care about the life and death of mortal heroes, Duque was even more certain of his thoughts. Beside him, 6 elemental creatures of different forms emerged. They formed an even larger composite magic array and chanted loudly. The rhythmic incantation gathered 6 invisible forces in the air, which eventually converged on Duque. Not only did the Sea Thun's tentacles around Duque bounce back as if they were struck by lightning, even the nearby air pressure dropped a bit. The magical elements summoned by Malygos in the air suddenly paused, and then quickly dissipated as if blown away by a strong wind. In the blink of an eye they disappeared without a trace. On the ground, the violent wind that was stirred up out of nowhere carried the scattered gravel and spun into the air. They gathered together in a frenzy, forming a huge sand tornado, surrounding Duque like the most loyal guards. In the blink of an eye, the massive magic array beneath Duque's feet revealed the shadows of weapons that were suspended in midair at a perpendicular angle to the ground. This is Dark Strike? Wild Blade? Spider Devil Spike? Undefeatable Will? Countless weapons hung in the air, and many people recognized these epic weapons from places such as the Molten Core, Blackwing's Nest, Naxxramas, and Mount Hyjal. No one knew what Duke was trying to do by summoning the projections of these weapons. Even more so, no one understood why huge wheels appeared around Duke's body. They only heard Duke's incantation sounded, I am an illusory man. The dream is the body, the will is the blood. Magic is the sky, glory is all. Peaking at fate, traversing the past and the present. Through countless battlefields, never once defeated. Unaware of life. Fearless of death. I have never been defeated. I have never been understood. Standing at the peak of time and space, intoxicated in victory. Past lives have never had meaning. This life is only born to protect. Therefore, I hereby declare. Wheel of Victory never stops. With the incantation, more weapons were constructed in the magic circle, and they began to turn from illusory to real. First, the translucent dotted lines became real outlines, then the materials used to construct the weapons were restored, the magic circle sealed in the weapons by skilled craftsmen when the weapons were cast was restored, the corresponding energy was injected, and finally the age of the weapons was restored. At first there were 10, 20, then 100, 1,000, countless weapons formed an enormous wheel spinning crazily just like the wheel of history rolling forward, unstoppable. The wheel rolled forward, crushing anything that belonged to Sea Thun. At this moment, the heroes felt that a string in their hearts was faintly touched. Many figures and things appeared in front of them, as if they were seeing the shocking battles that Duque had experienced under his leadership. This was not like a historical drama made up by bards, but an illusion that really existed in history. The power that Duque had at this time was based on the chain of victories piled up. And Duque seemed to be pushing the wheel of fate extremely smoothly, faster and faster. Only in this way could all resistance be crushed. Sea Thun's tentacles, which had annoyed the 4 dragon aspects, were almost instantly destroyed as soon as they appeared. A smaller eyeball tentacle? Obsidian Blade had long been hungry and thirsty, and with a slash the weapon and the tentacle were destroyed in an instant. A smaller claw tentacle? Claw of Lava Rage went up and tore it apart. Giant Eye Tentacle? 3 hands of magic simultaneously used, counterspell, instantly stirring up the elements, enough to make the eyeball tentacle choke back the whip magic like it was constipated. The only problem was the giant claw tentacle. Even though it was like a torrential rain pouring down, nailing more epic-grade weapons fiercely, this powerful tentacle still whipped and attacked all the targets it could hit regardless. However, the fact that Duque could flatten so many annoying tentacles in one breath not only shocked the mortal heroes, but even the 4 dragon aspects were surprised. Suddenly, everyone only saw a blur in front of them and 4 huge lips, like walls growing out of the ground, spun and wrapped around Duque. In the gap between the lips, everyone could even see some teeth that weren't too big but were extremely sharp. Obviously, the owner of this wriggling mouthpiece was Thun. The size of this mouthpiece alone was enough for mortals to look up at. The heroes not far away could even clearly smell the stench. Everyone had read Duque's strategy and everyone knew that the most important part of the strategy was that someone had to be swallowed by Thun, but that was disgusting. Chapter 1352. Just in case, Duque activated Ice Barrier in advance. He didn't have the thought of using his delicate skin and tender flesh to resist the sharpness of Thun's mouth, which had thousands of sharp teeth. As expected, after entering, Duque felt countless sharp teeth scraping against the ice formed by highly condensed ice elements outside the barrier. Fortunately, it was his senses and not his sense of hearing that came into play. Otherwise, wouldn't the sound of countless claws scraping against glass kill him? Wait a minute. Something's wrong. He had never heard of Thun's huge mouth swallowing people with so many teeth. If even a mage like Duque found it hard to deal with, then wouldn't the other unshielded professions be done for? Duque came back to his senses and looked at the system notification. Warning. Warning. You have been swallowed by the descendant of Oro of the Sandworm race. If you do not improve your condition, you may suffer serious damage. *CK. Did I make a mistake? Duque's face darkened and he exploded on the spot. Do you think I'm Hello Kitty if I don't get angry? A mere descendant of Oro was naturally unable to block the connection between Duque and the magic net. A huge amount of ice elements began to gather in the descendant's body. Saffron? Duque shouted in his soul. Understood, Ice Dragon replied on the spot. The layer of ice in Oro's heir's throat was growing thicker by the second, and in the span of a few breaths, it had turned into a giant block of ice that was firmly lodged in its throat. Then an incomparably violent draconic aura began to attack its low IQ brain, shaking its rationality. Very easily this mini-boss went completely berserk. It, who had originally retreated into the ground, jumped out again, ignoring the fierce attacks of the mortal heroes of the allied army, and charged straight ahead. In front of it was its boss Thun. Who would have thought that it would recklessly smash a large bloody hole in the lower part of its own gang leader's incense burner-shaped lower body. It even waved its 6 caliceri below its mouthpart as fast as lightning, trying to drill into it. Traveling through the sand was just an instinctive action for the sandworms of the Oro race. But for Thun it was pain. It should be said that the pain in his heart was greater than the pain in his body. On account that your father, Oro, had sacrificed his life for the country, I was kind enough to let you be my hired thugs, but you actually dare to rebel? It did not matter if Oro's descendant had done it intentionally or not. In any case, it had attacked its master, so it had to die. The newly emerged Thun tentacles ignored the attacks of the mortal heroes and viciously attacked Oro's children. Grandpa Thun's chrysanthemum sacred claw. Grandpa Thunus love lash. Here. Your first master's dismemberment technique. To Oro's descendant, however, this was nothing short of suffering. The intense pain and frenzy drove this monster to tear at everything it came into contact with. Outsiders could only see that the lower half of Oro's descendant's body was splattered with pieces of internal organs and blood, while the upper half that had burrowed and was spurting out Thun's bodily fluids. Was this the Thun clan's love-hate relationship? At this moment, a golden light pierced through Oro's descendant's lower abdomen. In the next instant, Duque appeared in the crowd, his face pale. Even with Duke's so-called demigod-level physique, he felt like vomiting after being shaken so much that he felt like vomiting. Duke suddenly understood why Medivh, as a demigod, had been able to stab him in the chest and kill him with a single stab of his sword. Although a mage-type demigod had the most powerful elemental attack power, while the heavens had bestowed upon Pharaoh such powerful destructive power, they had also very fairly made Pharaoh a very fragile person. Once his magical defenses were broken, his demigod body would at most be comparable to a mortal heroic paladin's body. The term thick skin was probably not fated to have anything to do with Duque for the rest of his life. After he came out, he only lost his composure for a moment. Duque immediately became that sage-like demigod with a staff in his left hand and a sword in his right. Seeing this, Thrall was stunned and couldn't help but cry out. Did he calculate the sandworm's threat to the team and deliberately let himself be swallowed? 30 meters away, Queen Sylvie's ears twitched. On her beautiful face, her facial muscles formed a rather awkward curve. No, you're thinking too much. That guy must have seen wrongly. It was at this moment that Duque suddenly felt that something was wrong. As if he was possessed by a ghost, he turned around. This time, the big mouth that rose up from the ground behind him finally overlapped with the image of the giant mouth tentacle in his memory. However, being swallowed twice in a row wasn't a pleasant experience. For a moment, Duque almost wanted to throw Gavin Rad, who was asking for a beating, into it and let him be swallowed instead. At this moment, Orgrim suddenly said, "Before you, there was a blonde priestess who was swallowed." *CK. Kalia got shot again? Looking around and seeing that Kalia was indeed nowhere to be seen, Duque jumped in without thinking. In a pitch-black world, the blonde priestess shook her head hard, trying to wake herself up from the dizziness as soon as possible. Almost instinctively she gave herself a holy word, shield. She didn't know how long she had been in a daze. Maybe it was a long time, or maybe it was only 2 or 3 seconds before she remembered what had happened before she fainted. She had been swallowed by the giant mouth tentacle. Even though the mouth of the giant mouth wasn't fast, it was as slow as a turtle in the eyes of a thief. Unfortunately for a priestess, it was as slow as a snail. As a result, the snail was robbed by the turtle without any suspense. The giant mouth swallowed her in one gulp. When she woke up, she hurriedly struggled to sit up. It was so dark that she couldn't see her fingers in front of her. No matter how many battles the girl had experienced and how she usually appeared quiet and strong in front of others, some characteristics wouldn't change as she grew up. At this moment she fumbled around on the ground in a panic, and with great difficulty she grabbed her staff. Now that she had the staff, she felt a lot more at ease. She quickly cast a cantrip-level spell, Illumination. The situation around her made her feel a little nauseous. The seemingly vast hall was actually Thun's huge stomach, with rough walls squirming all around. She didn't know if it was the stomach wall or something else. Ah! She let out a scream because she was shocked to find that her boots had stepped into something soft. The strong corrosive pain stung her, and the entire epic rank boots melted. Oh my god! I've been swallowed, I'll be melted. Thinking of this possible ending, her beautiful face paled. Fortunately, she didn't forget the way Duque had taught her. She almost rolled and crawled towards the nearby high ground. Chapter 1353. The air in Thun's stomach was abnormally foul. Apart from the sour smell of internal organs, there was also the typical smell of rotting corpses. Almost as soon as Duque was swallowed, he opened the system elf scan and shouted, "Kalia, are you okay? Are you still alive? Kalia, please don't let anything happen to you. If something happens to you, then I'll be a failure as a demigod." Thinking of this, Duque actually felt a little scared to the point that he was about to tremble. Frost elements spread under his feet, giving Duque a relatively safe environment. He looked around, hoping to find Kalia in this damned place that was half submerged in corrosive acid. But he was also afraid of seeing a cold, broken, beautiful corpse. After searching for a while with these conflicting thoughts, the system suddenly notified him that there was a pair of legs on a protruding rock not far away. This discovery almost made Duque die of sadness. But before he could get closer to take a look, he was relieved. It was a pair of night elf leather boots. It must have been some daring elf thief who had sneaked in not long ago and tragically died. Duque took a light breath of the cool air filtered by the ice shield and began to move towards higher ground. Although Kalia's movements were not as nimble as the other women, she had seen the world and experienced great battles. At this time she should have at least run to the predetermined location. Without even needing to throw a few fireballs, Duque could see in the blurry darkness that there was a high ground in his 9 o'clock direction. If history did not lie to him, that was the only exit. The elements here were already quite chaotic, so he could not use flash. Duque activated his magic and ice shield, moving quickly against the debris falling from above. Soon he found a human body on the top of a small hill. Duque rushed over and pulled, his hands full of corrosive mucus. If it wasn't for the holy light in her body forming a small protective layer on the surface of her skin, if it wasn't for the thinnest acid here and the extra extreme nature potion protecting her, Kalia might have been a corpse by now. At this moment, Duque looked as if he had found a rare treasure and let out a long sigh of relief. He skillfully controlled the frost elements to melt into a stream of water, gently washing the disheveled yet beautiful female body in front of him. His upper body was exposed to the air, and he just happened to fall on the stone so he didn't suffer any damage. Her lower body. Ugh, although she wasn't injured, her dress and everything else had been melted and torn. If it wasn't for the strange atmosphere, Duque would have silently praised her in his heart. Using the ice shield to repel the other elements, Duque turned her body over with his left hand and used the holy light to expel the filth from her body. At the same time, he placed his hand on her chest to check if she still had a heartbeat. At the same time, he called out to her urgently, "Kalia." "Carly." Halfway through, Duque knew he was in trouble. That's right. There was nothing wrong with a female priest. The blonde was wrong. Your sister's blonde hair. It was obvious that Si Thun's tentacles were constantly emitting green, purple and other such lights, causing the vision of others to have a color difference. That's right. That bastard Orgrim was one of the Forsaken? Then what the hell was he looking at? It was obvious that he was looking with the soul fire, so it was all black and white. Well, the main point was that the size and shape of the harmonious thing in his hand was completely wrong. After so many years, how could Duque have gotten the size of Kalia's ball wrong? At this moment, the dignified commander of the Alliance, the true demigod of Azeroth, Duke Marcus's face turned green, and the waterfall of sweat on his back looked like he was about to collapse. Oh my god. Please don't let her wake up at this time. The silly Duque had forgotten that he himself was someone who had stepped into the realm of gods, and he was fighting against the few true gods of Azeroth. He didn't even believe in himself, so who could save him? Her raised eyebrows moved, and her fair face was already full of crimson. Duque's heart skipped a beat and he thought to himself, it's over. For a moment, Duque almost wanted to use amnesia magic, physics, on her. Right. Just give her a hard punch in the head. Fainting would be good and giving her a concussion would be even better. Unfortunately, when Duque saw that gentle and pleasing face that was like that of a girl next door, he couldn't bear to do it no matter what. What he feared the most was that the air suddenly became quiet. The two of them maintained this posture for a full 5 seconds, and then she just woke up. Duque released his claws as if he had been electrocuted. With a sanctimonious expression, he looked like an upright and reliable young gentleman. Sally, you're awake? Are you okay? That's right, Duque made a big mistake. The first to be swallowed was Sally, not his Kalia. Well, the above was all the main point. The main point was that after Sally took the extreme nature potion, her lower body was quite slippery. See, Thun did a lot of things that slime monsters like to do. Sally's face instantly turned as red as a steamed red prawn. She stammered and said in a low voice, "I'm sorry, Sir Marcus. May I ask if you have spare clothes? It would be even better if you have equipment." Yes. While Duque was doing his business, summoning Saffron to attack Si Thun's weak points everywhere, he rummaged through his storage space that was like a doghouse. Why was it all women's equipment like quicksand robe and insight magic robe? Never mind, I'll give Sally a set first. Then Sally half sat, picked it up and her face turned red. She said in a mosquito-like voice, "Excuse me, do you have any other rape?" Duque slapped his forehead. "It's over. This is a big misunderstanding. These two robes were famous for being sexy in Azeroth. The biggest selling point was the high slit that reached the waist. Now that he didn't rape her, he just asked her to wear any magic robe. Wouldn't he be asking her to go to the battlefield with a gap? Although the upright and reliable young gentleman Dumuk silently praised it in his heart, he always felt that the girl was at a disadvantage. Gritting his teeth, Duque finally took out an indescribable item. At this time, Sally's hand trembled as she took it. Nothing else? Nothing else. Dumuk lowered his head, like a student being scolded by a fierce teacher. Of course not. Originally, it was something that Duque prepared to deceive Jaina and test the flow of magic between different people. What? Can you carry it over? Okay. Duque was as obedient as a grandson. Just as there was a rustling sound behind him, the ceiling of this stinky space suddenly opened again, and a figure covered in golden light suddenly fell down. "Boss, are you okay?" The first half of the sentence was extremely loud and the person who came was Gavin Rad. Then the second half of the sentence went astray. Even in this place you still don't forget about the girl. Okay, as expected of the boss. At this moment, Duque couldn't bear it anymore. Amnesia physical. A 40-meter-long ice sword appeared in Azeroth. Chapter 1354. Who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? In his dizziness, Gavin Raid naturally thought of the legendary 3 questions of philosophy. Suddenly, a thunderous roar sounded in the turbid air. Gavin Rad, don't just stand there. Attack Thun's stomach wall with all your might. With that, Duque slapped the back of Gavin Rad's head as if trying to wake him up. But Gavin Rad felt even more dizzy. Boss, why do I feel like you were the one who hit me hard just now? Gavin Rad recalled as he slashed at the stomach wall next to him with the wind sword and added a hammer of wrath. How is that possible? Duque argued. It was you who didn't dodge Thun's tentacle before coming down. There are tentacles in the stomach too? Yes. I just destroyed one. How can we understand the physiological structure of a true god-level monster? Dr. Du said confidently. I've read a lot of books, I won't lie to you. Who was the first to come down? Sally Whitemane. She couldn't take it and left. Duque was telling the truth. In this life, Thun's stomach structure was different from that in the game. It was a very interesting stomach part. It was a thing the size of a stool and looked like a meatball. As long as one gave that thing a hard punch, Thun's stomach would twitch violently and vomit out the person who beat the meatball. I see. Gavin Rad sighed. Don't think too much. The time in the stomach is limited. Go all out. As Duque spoke, he squeezed his magic circuit and released as much magic power as possible, bombarding any tentacle that dared to emerge from Thun's stomach. On the outside, Duque was an awesome demigod. Although Duque could last longer than mortals in Thun's stomach and used an ice shield to resist the corrosion of the natural elements, the magic net was cut off. Duque could only rely on his magic circuit, which was far superior to a Breaking Dawn mage but far inferior to a true god, to produce magic power. Soon, when the Oxhead chief Cain fell down, Duque couldn't hold on any longer. He had no choice. He had wasted too much time trying to save Sally. Before Duque left, he left behind a magic orb. As long as it was not destroyed, the ice elements released from it could at least act as a shield and air filter, allowing the people inside to last longer. Blarg. Under the violent attack of the tender flesh, Thun also vomited Duque out. After watching Duque leave, Gavin Rad heaved a heavy sigh and muttered to himself, Damn, luckily I was smart enough to pretend to forget. Otherwise, I might have been killed this time. What? Cain turned around abruptly. No, I'm fine. Gavin Rad decided to keep this matter to himself. The incident in his stomach was destined to be an episode that no one would ever mention again. On the other side, Sal was surprised to see Duque bounce out of Thun's incense burner body as if he had jumped out of a stone. Duque, you were just swallowed? No wonder the great chief was shocked. When Duque wasn't around, the songs and dances were still being sung and danced. No, it should be said that under the control of several elemental emissaries, more epic weapons were smashed out. Now, there were almost no small tentacles on the scene, whether it was claws or eyeball tentacles. Basically, as soon as the small tentacles came out, they were instantly killed by the weapons thrown out by the Wheel of Victory system. The mortal heroes were able to focus more on dealing with the giant claws and eyeball tentacles. In theory, the scales of victory should be tilted towards the allied forces. But this was not the case. Because in the outer circle of the battlefield, a terrifying fog of death had accumulated. They couldn't figure out what it was, but they could confirm that it wasn't just pure elemental damage. It was more like a combination of crazy will and some kind of terrifying curse. Nozdormu, who was the most unafraid of death, swept his tail made of sand in. It was fine if his tail suddenly broke midway. At first, the broken tail was like a broken lizard's tail, twisting and jumping on its own. After a few breaths, it turned into a sand monster the size of a minotaur with an unknown number of limbs. A kind of chaotic will and power that had never been seen before forcibly took away Nozdormu's control of the sand, which then mutated and created a new unknown type of monster. These monsters were extremely fierce. They fiercely rushed forward and attacked the Alliance and Horde powerhouses. In just one encounter, 2 of the forgotten powerhouses were directly killed, and even their corpses were devoured. Even a strong person like Orgrim's left arm was broken. Fortunately, the undead didn't feel pain. After using dark healing, he could barely move his left arm. Considering that no one had the energy to disperse such a large-scale, tentatively called poisonous fog, the entire battlefield suddenly became crowded. From the initial radius of a large space of 1,000 meters, it quickly shrank to less than 800 meters. Obviously, the speed of shrinking was still increasing. It could be foreseen that in at most 5 minutes, the 4 dragon aspects would completely lose the space to move. Duque, do you have any ideas? Alexstrasza shouted to Duque in the dragon's mental network. Our people will hit C-Thun's stomach. Theoretically, after a certain extent, C-Thun will fall into a short period of weakness. Then we'll go all out? Okay. But I hope that Onyxia will come too. As soon as the Red Dragon Queen's voice fell, 2 voices of opposition immediately appeared in the network. She's not qualified. She can't do it. The first voice was Maligos and the second was Nosdormu's. Obviously, Isra chose to be neutral. Alexstrasza seemed to be in a difficult position. As hardcore members of the Pantheon, the dragons had always fulfilled the duty given to them by the Titans, which was to protect planet Azeroth. They couldn't ignore the disturbance of the ancient gods. However, these ancient gods were existences that even the Titans couldn't deal with back then. In her opinion, the only way to destroy C-Thun's body and seal it again was to gather the 5 great dragon aspects in the Great Formation. Now that Maligos was holding them back, Onyxia could tell at a glance that she didn't have the will and confidence. Alexstrasza felt a headache coming on. At this time, Duque suddenly said, "Onyxia, go. This is for me." Okay. The Black Dragon Princess immediately became decisive. It wasn't an order not being forced. Duque's words, "for me," could make this once cunning black dragon become brave? The Red Dragon Queen glanced at Duque with curiosity. Maligos didn't let it go. "You'll replenish the insufficient energy?" "Yes. I'll replenish it." Chapter 1355. This is the dragon race's secret. Maligos' voice in the spiritual network was as firm as stone. "I'm only responsible for providing energy. As for how it's used, that's Onyxia's business." That was what Duque said. In fact, for a guy of Duque's level, just from the changes in energy transmission and observing the dragon race's magic array, he could see many things. Not to mention that Duque had a killer weapon, the System Elf. Now the dragon race had fallen into a vicious circle. If they wanted to exert the greatest power, they had to use the black dragons who had once betrayed them. Only by joining the Guardians of the Earth could the Pentashade dragon race be considered complete and exert the power of various high-end magic arrays to the extreme. Here came the main point. Ever since Nethario, the Wing of Death, was tempted by the ancient god Enzoth, the entire black dragon race had become the target of corrosion. Even every young dragon that had just hatched from the dragon egg would be affected by the ancient god. Onyxia was the only exception. Although she was also born after the fall of Deathwing, firstly she was a direct descendant of Nesario, so her vitality and will were stronger. Secondly, she was subdued by Duque when she was on the brink of death at 1% HP. In that extreme situation, even Enzoth had given up on her. In the end, Duque picked up a big bargain and got rid of Enzotha's will and soul corrosion hidden in her. During Alexstrasza's visit, she had even touched Onyxia herself to confirm this. It could be said that Onyxia was now the only black dragon that the Dragon Sleeping Temple could ally with, and the only black dragon that was qualified to be allied with. By the way, a certain black dragon prince who was also quite famous in history was still just an egg. Or maybe not even an egg. Because Deathwing died early, perhaps the poor guy known as the black-bellied Ratio would no longer have a chance to appear in this life. Speaking of which, since there was no choice, there would not be too much psychological burden. After Alexstrasza promised that if it didn't work, she would turn it into the 4 dragons formation, Maligos finally expressed his acquiescence with silence. After leaving the dragon race's spiritual network, Duque immediately looked at the data in the system prompt. In C-Thun's stomach, he left not only an ordinary oxygen mask and a natural resistance shield, but also a small surveillance circle. It could monitor the condition of the tentacles in C-Thun's stomach. In theory, if history didn't trick him, C-Thun would enter a period of weakness after all the tentacles were knocked out. It was a rare opportunity to focus all their firepower. Any attack that hit C-Thun's body would cause more than double the damage. The timing was not easy to grasp. First of all, the scene must not be too chaotic. If the scene was too chaotic, it would be easy for a murder case to occur. If they could not even keep their lives, how could they talk about focusing fire? Secondly, it was to pick a time when C-Thun's previous batch of giant tentacles had been killed and the new giant tentacles had yet to appear. Finally he had to dodge Si Thun's ultimate move. Its kinetic death ray could instantly kill anyone it saw. Even Nosdormu, who was known to have the thickest skin, did not dare to take it head-on. Almost at the same second that Duque finished thinking, most people suddenly heard Si Thun's murmur. "You will die. Your heart is about to explode." This evil god's voice went straight to the heart, and almost every mortal hero was in a trance. The warriors and paladins in heavy armor were fine. They were not fast to begin with. For rogues who were most concerned about speed, this was simply fatal. Just then, a giant eye tentacle broke through the ground and rose from the ground with a crackling sound. As rogues, they needed to find a way to break the giant eye tentacles. Eye beam. This kind of chain lightning ray would constantly jump on everyone's body. Every time it jumped, the damage would double. Basically, the third person would die. This state of confusion immediately caused the team to lose members. 3 melee players actually chose the same target. All of this could have been avoided. At most, the moment they discovered it, the 2 furthest would just roll away. However, the ancient god's mental attack directly caused everyone to enter a state of soul paralysis. At that moment, Gavinrad's face turned pale and he immediately activated his invincibility. Vanessa, who was the second to be attacked, immediately activated her shadow cloak. Although she was not immune to the ancient god's damage, it greatly reduced the damage she needed to take. The third one seemed to be a chieftain of the Forsaken. When the highly concentrated eye edge hit him, the people around him were shocked to find that his entire body had turned green. His body, which was no longer decaying because of the shadow power, suddenly turned into a human figure that seemed to be made of green algae. The next second, his entire body scattered on the ground like quicksand. Only the sound of epic-grade equipment clashing against the gravel could be heard. On the other side, Grom was also hit. He, who always fought first in every battle, became the target of the giant claw's tentacles in a brief pause. The huge tentacles wrapped around his entire body, trying to grind him to pieces. This furious attack could be said to have used up all of Grom's strength and courage. At this moment he was almost standing in the same position as what Oro had said. If the giant claw's tentacles were a few centimeters deeper, Orgrimmar would lose a living legend the next day. Tentacles were soft structures and did not have joints, but because the giant claw's tentacles had a hard claw-like structure, it had joint-like joints. Grom was betting on whether there were strong muscles there. If he did not make the right bet, I've lived enough, Master Howl said to himself in his heart. Living enough did not mean giving up. He used his remaining right hand to grip the handle of the axe tightly, and with a sudden knee strike, he hit the joint of the giant claw. Crack. An armor of Mount Hygel's level was indeed extraordinary. The leg armor violently hit the giant claw's hard shell full of barbs. Fortunately, his knee was not pierced into a sieve because he used the warrior's unique Fury attack, which even produced an effect similar to Thunder Strike. This gave him a precious opportunity. Even if it was only for a short moment, Bloodhowl perfectly hit the joint of the hard shell on the tentacles. The sharp axe blade easily cut through the thick tentacles as if it was cutting through butter. It was a pity that when he jumped down he did not pay attention to his feet. Although the heavy boots had thick metal soles, this could not stop a hard claw from piercing through the soles and into the surface of his foot. He felt that the entire sole of his foot was completely pierced, and the pain was so great that he was twitching. Even when he pulled his foot out as fast as he could, Theon's holy light flash was still quickly applied to his head. He still knew that for a long time he would not be able to use his signature jumping slash. At this moment, he suddenly saw the eyeballs in Si Thun's huge purple eyes begin to bulge. Everyone be careful, Si Thun is about to use Dark Flash. Chapter 1356. It seemed that Si Thun had also realized that fighting the wyverns was too much of a loss, and the combat power of the mortal heroes was unexpected. The mortals that it didn't pay attention to stopped its tentacles from harassing the 4 dragon aspects. Si Thun would definitely change this. More giant claws and tentacles emerged from the ground, and all kinds of tentacles entangled every existence that dared to resist its authority in their own way, regardless of whether they were small or not. Although the situation hadn't exceeded Duque's understanding of Si Thun, Duque knew that the so-called strategy could be thrown into the toilet and washed away. The number of tentacles was completely wrong, like King Forest. The most exaggerated thing was that the natural elemental magic in the surrounding air had increased exponentially. In contrast, the three most traditional elements of ice, fire, and arcane magic in the pharaoh were repelled to the greatest extent. See, Thun was crushing all of the pharaoh, including Maligos and Duque, with his true god-level power. This was its lair, and it was in charge of what kind of place it was. Maligos was furious. This meant that if he wanted to play magic, he would have to downgrade to the Breaking Dawn level. This was absolutely humiliating for him, who claimed to be the only ruler of the magic world. He immediately made a decision to give up the magic he was best at and instead pounced on Thun, biting and chopping off every tentacle that belonged to Thun. Not far away, Duque could clearly feel that at this moment, the laws of magic that all mages were familiar with were being forcibly distorted, leaving him in fear. Thun's chaotic and violent power was descending, and its irresistible power was dominating and taking over everything. Duque could hear the sound of the magic net collapsing in this area. The shattering sound in the soul's vision was even more unsettling and frightening than the earth-shattering roars in reality. Moreover, the magic net was the main part of Duque's main city as a god. The collapse of this part of the magic net was tantamount to cutting off at least 30% of Duque's strength in one go. Thun was very shrewd. Duque's face fell. A dragon aspect was still a dragon without magic. He was a demigod of magic who had ascended as a human. Could he really transform into the white-robed sword Saint Gandalf and stab him with the spiral sword? In the past, Duque had backstabbed so many strong enemies, and it was always successful because most of those enemies had something like the heart, a so-called vital point. Thun, the monster evil god, didn't have such a thing. The only way to kill it was to forcefully cut off its life force and beat it into a pile of shit. Duque's spiral sword was really not useful here. There was no such thing as an absolutely powerful profession in this world. Since his mystic level was suppressed, Duque had to find another way out. Master? Duque. What should we do? Please give us your instructions. Duque and the other elemental emissaries anxiously asked Duque through the soul connection. They were existences that used the elements as their life forms. If they lost the supply of elemental magic power, not only would their strength be greatly reduced, but they would also face the risk of their souls being annihilated. Duque said, "All of you return to the weave outside. Inject as much magic power as you can into my body before the weave here collapses. Take care." Alonce's fail seemed to want to persuade Duque, but in the end he could only say these two words. In the center of his field of vision, the huge eye of Thun was swelling more and more. The system prompt, "A high-energy attack is about to strike," was flashing non-stop. Everyone could see that Dark Flash was about to be released. Because there were too many tentacles, the scene was very chaotic. There were still people fighting the most threatening eyeball tentacles, but there were at least 3 more giant claw tentacles with stronger life force near the eye of Thun. The cruel giant claw tentacles twitched instinctively, attacking every living thing that passed by, and hitting something similar to the warrior profession's tendon break. This was a skill with a strong deceleration effect. In front of the world-destroying Dark Flash, this was undoubtedly the most vicious curse of death. They couldn't run, because they would have to watch helplessly as the crimson light that symbolized death swallowed them up. It wasn't just one person who was hit, but a total of 7. Magni could rely on Avatar, and Theon could use his invincibility to get rid of this damn debuff, but the remaining 5 couldn't escape no matter what. Ox Chief Kane, Grandpa Howl, Hadgeron Brightwing, Benedict, and Thrall. Dark Flash began to shoot. Death rays as thick as the diameter of its eyeball surged out and hit the ground heavily. Countless insects crawled out of the gravel-filled ground and fled in all directions. Stones of all sizes spun strangely on the ground and danced in fear. Some tiny grains of sand even bounced up from the violent tremors and flew into the air. They first melted into glass under the ultra-high temperature, then turned into terrifying nothingness along with the insects that couldn't escape in time when the crimson destructive rays touched them. Kane's muscles bulged as he roared, trying to use brute force to resist the short-term deceleration effect of tendon break. With a smile on his face, Grom silently took over Magni's position, using his remaining arm to lift the tomahawk and block a giant claw tentacle. However, apart from them, everyone seemed to have accepted their impending fate. No matter what Benedict had in mind at this moment, he was a benevolent elder, continuing his treatment. After realizing that he had no chance to escape, Hadgeron stopped moving. He stood still and shot arrow after arrow. Thrall didn't act like a great chief at all. Instead, he acted like a pure warrior, madly slashing the tentacles in front of him. That's right. He was an orc first, then a warrior, and finally a great chief. An orc warrior, even if he knew he was going to die, he had to die on the way. No, many tribal masters let out shrill cries, but their feet didn't stop. They could only instinctively follow the established tactics and run around Thun to avoid the invincible power of Dark Flash. They twisted their heads and stared at where Thrall was. For a moment, Woken's heart stopped beating. As Thrall's chief advisor, as a firm supporter of the tribe, Woken never hesitated to use the greatest malice to suspect and speculate on those who were against the tribe or once had a grudge against the tribe. Now, what he was most worried about had happened. In front of him was a great opportunity for the Alliance to weaken the tribe. This was a coalition army formed to fight against the ancient evil gods, and it was also a war where the weak gathered to challenge the strong. If there were any casualties in such a difficult battle, it would be normal. Chapter 1357. The strength of the Alliance and the Horde was already disproportionate. Wajin couldn't imagine how much cohesion the Horde would have if they lost Grom, Kane, and Sal. Maybe the Horde would not be destroyed and maybe there would be new Horde heroes to lead the Horde. In any case, the decline of the Horde would be inevitable. If there was another big incident like the attack of the Swarm, maybe the Horde would have to join the Alliance again. The orcs in the old Horde had to wear slave collars because they were defeated. This time, the warriors of the Horde might have to wear slave collars themselves because they begged for the reproduction of the race. Perhaps the higher-ups of the Alliance would proclaim that this was an amalgamation of the races, or perhaps a wise leader like Duke would play down the past grudges and not wear any humiliating marks on the Horde. But to the warriors of the Horde, this decision itself was like a slave collar. Suffocation, terror, uneasiness, all kinds of negative emotions surged into Wajin's heart. Heroes could not be replicated. If Duke really had a way to not use it, Wajin didn't dare to imagine it anymore. The first landing point of the Dark Flash was far away from Duke. According to Thun's current rhythm of sweeping 180 degrees clockwise in a semicircle, Duke only needed to lift his legs and run 2 steps to reach the safe zone. The shock of the Horde's powerhouses fell into Duke's eyes. He didn't say a word and watched the scene coldly. Duke knew that as the biggest core of the Alliance's formation, his every move would be a signal. It could even be said that if he ordered to clean up the Horde first, except for a few upright people like Tyrion Fordring, most of the Alliance's powerhouses would be happy to immediately turn around and eliminate the unstable factor of the Horde first. Even if the Alliance and the Horde had cooperated for the 3rd time in the Battle of Calamity, Mount Hyjal, and the Battle of the Swarm, presumably no one would forget the hatred between the Alliance and the Horde. Even if it was a tragedy caused by drinking demon blood by mistake and maliciously led by people with ill intentions, having a reason to forgive did not mean that it would definitely be forgiven. However, at this moment, Duke had a feeling of being in a trance. It was the feeling of standing at the crossroads of history and controlling fate. There had never been such a clear feeling of one person controlling the fate of millions of people from the 2 major forces, or even all the living beings on planet Azeroth. Perhaps it would be more beneficial for the Alliance to let Sal die here and let the tribe become a pile of loose sand. The Alliance that had swallowed up the Horde might be even more focused on fighting against the Burning Legion and the Ancient Gods. Perhaps this was what Duke as a human should do. However, at this time Duque felt that it was pointless to do so. Wasn't the world of Azeroth exciting precisely because of the war epics written by heroes? Wasn't it precisely because of the strategy of inclusiveness that there were hundreds of races gathered together, regardless of race, occupation, age, or gender? What if he did? Wouldn't that be going against the flow of the world? Duque suddenly laughed because he suddenly remembered his original identity. An insignificant citizen of the Celestial Empire. Since such a large Celestial Empire could be inclusive of 56 races, why couldn't the leader of a small alliance with only tens of millions of people do the same? Duque walked towards the safe zone according to the prearranged tactics. For some reason in the eyes of others, Duque did not take a step back. The power of fairness and love nurtured in Duque's heart seemed to erupt at this moment, forming a towering flag in the illusory spiritual world. Duque made his move. Even though his strength had temporarily fallen to the Breaking Dawn level because of Thun's forceful removal of the weave and other elements, he was still a well-deserved expert here. A longbow made of pure holy light suddenly appeared in his hand. Queen Sylvanas looked at it in surprise because the shape of this bow was the bow she and Duque had used to shoot arrows together when the cataclysm invaded the Well of the Sun. The slender and sharp spiral sword turned into the sharpest arrow and was knocked on the bowstring. Every move of Duque's was very fast, but every ranger, including Queen Sylvanas, felt very awkward when they saw it. After all, Duque did not know how to shoot arrows. He was purely copying Queen Sylvanas' posture when she shot the arrow that day purely from memory. Although it was elegant and efficient for a female elf to use such a posture, if it was a rough man, it would be a little too horrible to look at. The posture was not the main point. The main point was that Duque could actually forcibly grasp the knack of archery through imitation. The bowstring vibrated. The next moment, an arrow suddenly appeared beside the giant claw that Grom and Sar were fighting with. The golden arrow perfectly pierced through the gap in the shell of the giant claw. The golden arrow tore through flesh and blood, and the stinky liquid split the black void like a line, and then turned into a bloody mist. After the golden spiral arrow, or rather the spiral sword, shot through the huge tentacle before the terrifying light of dark flash touched it, it made the smallest 180-degree turn in the air. Then, under the guidance of Duque's power, it flew back along the periphery of Si Thun's body in an arc. The 5 trapped people couldn't help but have a thought. When did the Alliance have a god of archery? Before they could think too much, Queen Sylvanas had personally demonstrated and shot the second arrow. This time, Queen Sylvanas had used all her strength to shoot the arrow, aiming at it. Originally, Queen Sylvanas' attack alone was not enough. At the critical moment, a claw popped out from the Emerald Dream and fiercely added another hit. The giant claw that wrapped around Cain fell 1 second later. Go! Duque's stern voice came from afar. You make it sound so easy. Grom complained, which was rare for him. That's right. How'd it go? The 5 of them still had at least 3 seconds of broken tendon, but Si Thun's ultimate skill only needed 1 second at most. At this moment, they were pleasantly surprised to find that the ground under their feet had turned into ice. The next moment, the ice suddenly bounced up obliquely. They were like marbles bounced off a spring, and their whole bodies flew out of the safe zone. The powerhouses on both sides caught the 5 who were bounced off. Hadgeron! Queen Sylvanas shouted. Great Chief? Woken was extremely surprised. Duque's action showed his attitude. Not only would he not give up Hadgeron and Benedettas, the 2 seemingly second-tier heroes in the Alliance, but he even intended to save Sar, the 3 core figures of the Horde. Not only the Alliance but even the powerhouses of the Horde felt the power of Duque's will. Magni, who passed by Duque, sighed slightly. His nose actually felt sour. Chapter 1358. This was the faith that mortals had towards the light. The young man named Duque, his country, and his companions had unknowingly surpassed Thoradin the Great, who had been revered as a saint for 2,800 years because he had teamed up with the High Elves to expel the Trolls. He had walked to the forefront of the era. Magni sighed. If the many living beings in Azeroth could survive, perhaps the name Duke Marcus would become an eternal legend. William happened to be running near Magni and suddenly asked, Uncle Magni, can I really become a great leader like Uncle Marcus in the future? Magni laughed. In his God's Descent state, he ran with big strides and laughed heartily. Silly boy. There is only one Duke Marcus and there is only one William Rin. Moreover, mortals are mortals and gods are gods. Before you have the ability to step into the divine realm, why do you care so much? You're just asking for trouble. William was stunned. Suddenly, the confusion that had been stuck in his heart for a long time was solved. Yes, every existence in the world was unique. No one would be a degraded copy of another. William was William. As long as he did his best and had a clear conscience, it would be fine. Moreover, if the gap was too big, he would lose the heart to catch up. Mortals were destined to look up to the divine realm. On the other side, Thrall, who had been saved, looked at Duque with an incomparably complicated expression. Logically speaking, he should hate Duque. It was precisely because of this man's incomparably outstanding and even era-transcending wisdom that led to the defeat of the old tribe and caused hundreds of thousands of orcs to become slaves. He, who hadn't personally participated in the Battle of the Dark Portal and World War II, could shout, "Orcs will never be slaves," without hesitation. This heroic statement might be praised by the tribe for thousands of years, but he couldn't say half a sentence like, "Duque, I hate you." Resentment? Perhaps. But at this moment there was more admiration. While running, Thrall's mouth that was full of fangs squirmed for a long time before he asked, "Why? Do you think it's because we are true allies? Did we swear to protect each other? Or do you mean that I'm a good person, a great saint?" Duque smiled. Neither. Thrall suddenly gritted his teeth. Orgrim told me. You had personally ordered assassins to assassinate me when I was still a baby. He's just a weak baby. For a moment, the experts on both sides almost suspected that Sal was going to fight with Duque. Duque's tone changed and his words became sonorous. I never intended to deny it. At that time, a completely destroyed tribe was more beneficial to the Alliance. If I was in power at that time, I would have slaughtered all the captives of the tribe, just like how the tribe slaughtered all the civilians in every human village in the Elven Forest. The air suddenly froze. Sal did not know how to continue. At this moment, Duque's facial muscles suddenly softened. But that's all in the past. The current relationship between the Alliance and the Horde had nothing to do with justice, pity, or hatred. Allies? The benevolence of a saint? Sorry, of course I won't say such superficial words. If you have to ask me for an answer, I will tell you that this is the need of the world. The need of the world. Sal was a little confused. Don't worry. If I choose to attack the Horde one day, it will be because the conflict between the Alliance and the Horde cannot be reconciled, and I will do it at least 3 days after the Horde receives the official declaration of war. Perhaps one day in the future I will kill you and perhaps you will kill me. In this world where even the Titans who are known as gods can fall, nothing is immortal. Duque's words were shocking. Not only Sal but all the experts of the Alliance and the Horde around him lost the ability to speak. Please remember, you and I may fight each other and die a violent death. The forces you and I represent may tear up the Alliance and become enemies. But not today. Yes, not yesterday. Maybe tomorrow. But not today. Not today. This sentence itself contained a mysterious attitude. An attitude that could make both sides feel relieved. Maybe tomorrow they would become mortal enemies again, but not today. Maybe tomorrow they would perish, but not today. There might be a lot of bad luck and misfortune in the future, but definitely not today. Today was destined to be a memorable day for mortals. Because today would be a great victory day for mortals and demigods. Because today would be the day of victory for the allied forces of many races to overthrow the dark ancient evil god Si-Thun. Sarl laughed loudly and waved the burning hammer of destruction. Ah, Duke Marcus, I admire you, let's go together. Kill this disgusting guy. Duque also smiled and waved the spinning golden sword in his hand. Ha, Sal, I also admire you and I used to want to kill you. But not only Sal and Duque, but even the experts of the Alliance and the Horde who heard the conversation between the two big shots shouted in unison. Not today, when Si-Thun's dark flash drew a 180-degree arc and stopped helplessly without any success. The experts of the Alliance and the Horde burst out with the greatest enthusiasm and combat power, bravely pouncing on their targets. The space that could be moved around shrank once again. The 4 dragon aspects and a slightly smaller black dragon with Si-Thun as the center occupied an average of 5 directions. Duque's words were also heard by the 4 dragon aspects. Alexstrasza and Isra nodded at Duque. They agreed with his words. Nozdormu was deep in thought, only Malygos was still unhappy. Perhaps in the future, it will be difficult for so many dragon aspects to gather together to deal with the ultimate evil. Regardless of whether we have conflicts with each other, I still want to say, not today. Yes, today was a day to work together. Tomorrow's conflicts would be dealt with tomorrow. Malygos spat fiercely and finally nodded at Alexstrasza. Every battlefield in the hall was ignored by the dragons and Duque, and all the tentacles were left to the mortals to deal with. Only the heads of the dragons were left. The dragon's head was ferocious and uneven, the dragon's eyes emitted a blazing light, and the fangs that were slightly exposed were glowing fiercely. The entire dragon's mental network was dead silent, as if the world had come to a standstill at this moment. It made others hallucinate as if these huge dragons were just sculptures or decorations. All the distracting thoughts eventually returned to nothingness, and the soft breathing sound of the dragons spread like ripples. Unknowingly, every dragon's breath came together. The same frequency, the same weight. Chapter 1359. A bolt of lightning zigzagged across the dark hemispherical space, and the dark void suddenly boiled like porridge. A 5-colored spot of light suddenly appeared 100 meters above the eye of Si-Thun. Like a falling stone hitting the mirror-like surface of a lake, a circle of ripples appeared in the air, and the 5-colored circle spread out to a radius of at least 500 meters. Even the poisonous circle summoned by Si-Thun was forced to retreat. A soft woo-woo sound was heard. This is... Kalia's voice was a little cautious. I know. It's the Dragon Clan's formation, right? Jaina was a little excited as she watched this scene happen. Every powerhouse in the fierce battle noticed the changes above their heads. Their movements were a little distorted due to excitement, and most of them took the time to look up, but they had to retract their gaze and focus on the battle. Not everyone had the spare time to appreciate the huge shadow that gradually emerged from the five-colored circle of light. It was a majestic palace. It was silver-white, inlaid with gold-edged carvings everywhere, with complex and thick Greek-style columns, and a holy palace covered with snow. However, this temple was upside down. It was as if it formed a mirror image of Thun on the ground. When everyone saw the towering temple gradually transforming from a shadow to reality, and saw those translucent illusory ancient dragons wandering around the inverted temple, they finally realized what kind of palace it was. It's the Dragon Slumber Temple. The dragon aspect actually summoned the Dragon Slumber Temple. The sudden appearance of the strange temple finally affected the entire battlefield, and even Thun could not help but turn his huge eyes to stare at the uninvited guest that suddenly broke in from mid-air. More and more colors of light flickered in the dark void, like the light of stars twinkling. Every time a five-colored light flashed, a mighty and majestic dragon with shining scales was left behind. Red dragon, blue dragon, green dragon, bronze dragon, and even the legendary black dragon that had left the Dragon Slumber Temple. These illusory dragon projections pushed aside Thun's poisonous fog and completely spread out over the dark hemispherical space with a radius of 1,000 meters. After the light flickered, a vast sea of dragons appeared in the sky. Every dragon was glowing with holy light. It even seemed like a titan in the pantheon was standing at a higher place among the dragons, looking at the twisted and hideous Thun with a majestic gaze. The battlefield was silent for a moment. In the next moment, a clear and melodious dragon roar resounded throughout this dark underground world. In the north, the Red Dragon Queen raised her head high and spoke in Draconic. In the name of the titans of the pantheon, I, Alexstrasza, swear to lead the Red Dragon race to protect the purity of life on planet Azeroth. The alarm in Thun's heart rang. In just a moment of daze, it discovered that it had lost control of part of the corrosive evil divine power around it. His connection with the divine powers had been severed. Originally, he relied on the corrosion star soul to forcefully extract the life force of the planet, allowing him to become an existence that even the Pantheon Hall couldn't deal with. At this moment, it found that its control area in the crust was invaded by a ball of green flames. It was clearly like a ball of raging flames, but it allowed the underground space that had been exhausted due to its excessive extraction of power to show life again. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. The entire depths of the crust swayed gently. Then Malygos, Nosdormu, and Isra made their oaths one after another. Under the witness of the sleeping dragon temple, each oath would deepen the bond between the dragon aspect and the planet, making it stronger and more able to evoke the resonance of the will of planet Azeroth. It could be said that the Guardian Oath was the source of the dragon aspect's power. Malygos mobilized the elements of this world. Nosdormu consolidated the time and space lines of the planet. Isra eliminated the evil dreams, wills, as much as possible. Under the witness of the sleeping dragon temple, each oath would deepen the bond between the dragon aspect and the planet, making it stronger and more able to evoke the resonance of the will of planet Azeroth. It could be said that the Guardian Oath was the source of the dragon aspect's power. At this time, it was Onyxia's turn. If she had a choice, Alexstrasza did not want to put this weak-willed junior last. That was because the pressure on her was the greatest at the beginning and the end. It couldn't be helped. The will of the planet started with living beings and ended with the Earth as the carrier. Who asked the original Nesario to be so powerful? The father had fallen, and the daughter had turned from a traitor to a loyal subject. How strong could her will be? There was no way to fake it in front of the will of the planet, so Onyxia's oath sounded very spineless. In the name of the prophet of my lord's fate, the demigod of the Azeroth weave, Duke Marcus I, Onyxia, am a dragon that obeys the will of my lord. In accordance with the guardian will of my lord, I will protect the land of Azeroth. Wait. Very weak. You're so weak, aren't you? She did not have her own will at all. Even in her declaration, she only claimed that she was a pure thug. What she meant was, I'm just a worker. Don't look for me if there's nothing important. Even if the sky falls, my lord will hold it up. Alexstrasza and Isra rolled their eyes when they heard this. The other two didn't look happy. Nosdormu bared his teeth and Malygos spat. Pfft. Onyxia ignored them all and pretended not to hear. Anyway, protecting the world has nothing to do with me. I'm just a slacker. I'm forced to be a mount because I want to live. I'm being ridden day and night because I want to live. If the side of justice is the victor, I don't mind being the messenger of justice. Her oath was weak, so the response given by the will of the planet was naturally weak. It was on a completely different level from the previous 4 dragon aspects. If Duque had not held the line at the end, the Red Dragon Queen would probably have announced the change to the 4 dragon formation. Duque stood at the junction of Onyxia's neck and back. His feet seemed to have grown roots as he stood firmly on the shiny black dragon scales. The cloak behind him fluttered even though there was no wind. His tiger lips moved slightly and a clear voice sounded. I, Duke Marcus, hereby swear, I don't care who you are and I don't care what you want to do. Whether it's the supreme demon king or the evil ancient god that has taken root on the planet. Since you're in Azeroth, you have to listen to the rules of Azeroth. Or get lost. Or die. The simple and violent oath caused the shadows of the entire dragon's slumber temple to buzz. Then the oath became an echo, circulating again and again in the vibration of the laws, becoming louder and louder. First, it resounded through the entire Karaj temple, then Silithus, and finally it seemed to shake through the entire planet of Azeroth. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.